Chapter 1832. As for Shen Jinyi's current situation, there was no need for Xiaoyang to give him any pointers. Shen Jinyi was very arrogant. He had been very arrogant in the Decimo 8 wasteland map. However, he was different from Xin Zhuang. He was inexplicably confident even though he had no ability. That was what made people speechless. Xiaoyang continued, moving forward. Soon, he saw Bai Jian and Shen Wushuang. They were sitting under a pillar, respectively, and seemed to be in a trance. Obviously, they were receiving the divine intense from within. That was why they were not distracted at all. Suddenly, beams of golden light shone continuously. It was very eye-catching. Xiaoyang immediately quickened his pace. He glanced over and saw the white-clothed lady sitting on the ground. Her body was constantly emitting a golden light. It was an extremely spectacular sight. Every beam of golden light looked very intense. Moreover, they contained some domineering sword intent. They were very powerful. At the same time, the divine intent on the stone wall turned into words and circled around her body. It was obvious that it was lining up to enter her body. However, the speed was very slow. Seeing this scene, Xiaoyang was also dumbfounded. Princess Mingzhu was indeed the favored daughter of the God Realm. Just by sitting there were countless opportunities pouring into her body. It could be said that she was extremely envious. She was blessed by the heavens. It was not something that could be envied. Princess Mingzhu could be said to be the #1 genius of the God Realm in the past 10,000 years. She was also blessed by the heavens. Naturally, it was easier for her to attract the attention of the martyrs of the God Realm when she came to the tomb of the God Realm. Therefore, it was very normal for them to help her. Even Shen Fian, who was not that talented, had also gained a lot of benefits in the ancient tomb. On the other hand, Luo Rong did not gain anything for a long time. Seeing Princess Mingzhu like this, the corner of his mouth twitched. Clearly, he did not feel the same way. He had followed Princess Mingzhu into the tomb. Naturally, he knew that the lady had been blessed the moment she came in. That was something that no one could be envious of. Sometimes comparisons were odious. Princess Mingzhu just sat there, and the divine intents came to report to her obediently. Luo Rong, on the other hand, had put in a lot of effort. However, he did not gain anything. That made him very upset. Naturally, he felt a little unbalanced. However, what could he do about it? He could only watch helplessly. There was nothing he could do. Xiaoyang, on the other hand, thought that it was normal. He had experienced it before, so he was used to it. However, he maintained a good attitude because, in his opinion, if it was his, no one could take it away from him. If it was not his, even if he racked his brains, he would not be able to make it his. Moreover, in this situation, it was meaningless to think too much. He could only honestly search for his own opportunity. The tomb of the God Realm was this. Sometimes the battles were not because of the fight for opportunities. Instead, it was because of some grudges. Even if you want to fight for these opportunities, even if you can kill your opponent, but if you don't have fate with these monolith inscriptions, then it's just a waste of effort. There's no meaning to it at all. Sometimes the reality was like that. It made one feel helpless and helpless. There was nothing one could do to change it. However, to be honest, it was a good thing. At least, they did not have to fight for the opportunities. In fact, they even had to work together to deal with the undead in front of the Heaventop Mountain. After looking at it for a while, Xiaoyang began to walk around the place. He was still the same as before, preparing to sense that these inscriptions were fated with him. It wouldn't be too late for him to comprehend them then. Luo Rong smiled bitterly when he saw Xiaoyang walking around aimlessly. It seemed that this chief was like him. He was not liked by the ancestors of the realm of the gods. In this way, he felt a little better. It seemed that he was not the one with the worst luck. Luo Rong comforted himself and felt that it did not matter anymore. He gradually calmed down and began to meditate again. After walking around, Xiaoyang finally chose the tablet inscriptions on a stone pillar. Although he did not know what kind of opportunities there were, He felt that it was easy to comprehend. The principle was that simple. After a while, Xiaoyang entered the state. The divine intent began to flow into his sea of consciousness. In his sea of consciousness, a small figure quickly appeared. The figure was wielding a sharp sword and was constantly brandishing it. It was obvious that the martial skill inscribed on the stone pillar was a sword technique. There were many intricacies within it. However, even if one obtained the divine intent, it was still impossible to completely comprehend it in a short period of time. It still required a very long time to slowly digest and comprehend it. Xiaoyang's foresight was also very far-sighted. He only needed to observe for a while to know how many subtle points there were. Although this swordsmanship was not as violent as the thunderfire sword technique and had a strong explosive force, it was more skillful. If one could master it through a comprehensive study, there would definitely be a great improvement in one's swordsmanship. However, how much of an improvement there would be would depend on one's comprehension ability. After all, whether one could fully comprehend the opportunities after obtaining them still depended on one's hard work and talent. Although Xiaoyang's luck was not bad, it was still a far cry from that heaven-blessed girl's luck. At this time, Princess Mingzhu had also finished wiping away the divine intent on the stone pillar. Even those strange words had completely disappeared, causing the stone wall to become incomparably smooth. Princess Mingzhu, on the other hand, stretched her back lazily, appearing to be bored to death. It was as if she had just taken a nap and obtained all the benefits from it. After entering the tomb of the god of sin, she was like this. As long as she wanted to obtain the divine intent, she only needed to sit there and be sincere. There was no need for any hard work at all. When she looked up, she realized that the stone pillar's inscriptions did not seem to be very pleasing to the eye. All along, Princess Mingzhu was not like Xiaoyang and the others, who would try their luck when they encountered something. If they were lucky, they would obtain some divine intent. If they were unlucky, they would obtain nothing. As for her, it was completely up to whether she found it pleasing to the eye or not. Chapter 1833. Princess Mingzhu looked at it for a long time, but did not find anything pleasing to the eye. She yawned and got ready to go out for a walk. After all, if one stayed in such a depressing place for too long, it would affect one's mood. Therefore, it was better to adjust one's state of mind to prevent any flaws. When she walked to Xiaoyang's side, she found it strange that the divine decree did not condense into golden words. Could it be that the people from the outside world comprehended differently from them? However, she did not continue to think about it and walked out quickly. After all, everyone's fortuitous encounters were different, and this was something that could not be forced. Therefore, even if she wanted to help, she might lead others astray in the end. At that time, the gains would not make up for the losses. Xiaoyang was completely oblivious to the fact that someone was standing behind him. He was completely immersed in his swordsmanship. As he was not from the realm of the gods, it was difficult and slow for him to comprehend the opportunities. However, there were pros and cons. As long as Xiaoyang could obtain the divine intent within, he would be able to digest a portion of it. He wouldn't have to swallow it all in one go. After that, he would need to spend more time to comprehend it. Just like the true intent manifestation art, after he comprehended it, he struck while the iron was hot and continued to cultivate it. He even condensed that last breath of Qi. When he fought with Lei Dingtian, he took advantage of the convenience to improve his cultivation by leaps and bounds. He directly raised his physical body to the 9th rank. How terrifying was that? It could be said that if it was not for this opportunity, how could he be on par with Lei Dingtian later on? It was also because of this that there was hope for him to deal with the people from the Greenly world. Otherwise, based on the previous situation, Xiaoyang would have only thought of bringing everyone to escape from this place instead of forcing himself to fight. As time passed, everyone started to get better. Even Luo Rong, who was unlucky, and Xinjini, who was upset, started to reap some benefits. Although Lei Dingtian was the last to enter, he also got an opportunity. It could be said that it was easy for him. After an unknown period of time, Xiaoyang completely turned the inscription on the stone pillar into his own. He did not continue to comprehend it. Instead, he walked out and prepared to go out for a walk. After leaving Heaven Peak Mountain, the place was still devastated. However, the smell of gunpowder had completely disappeared. The deathly aura that had been beaten to the point of disappearing appeared once again and occupied the area. However, the dead spirits still did not dare to come forward. After being in a daze for a while, Xiaoyang walked into Heaven Peak Mountain again. He calculated the time. He had been in here for a long time, and it was about time for him to leave. Therefore, he had to make the best use of his time to comprehend it. If he could get the opportunity, he could leave earlier. Although Xiaoyang, he was not able to block the deathly aura. However, there was no way to completely isolate it, so it was inevitable that it would be affected to some extent. In order to change the effect, it could not be dispelled with spiritual energy alone. It could only be removed naturally after leaving the tomb. This was also a problem that Xiaoyang discovered later on. However, it was not bad to use it to count. According to Xiaoyang's estimation, he had been in the tomb of the god of sin for more than 2 years. The best time to leave the tomb of the god of sin for 3 years was not far away. In the Heaven Peak Mountain, the opportunities were also extraordinary. Many people had also gradually gained a lot of benefits. However, during this period, someone took the lead to leave. That was Shen Jinyi, because he was seriously injured and his cultivation base was not very stable. He could not continue to hold on. If he continued to stay, the deathly aura would become more and more serious. In the end, it would be normal for him to become a tomb keeper. In the beginning, Shen Jinyi was not willing to leave because he had gone through untold hardships to get here. If he left just like that, he would be unwilling. In the end, Princess Mingzhu spoke up, so he left helplessly. He could disobey anyone, but if he went against Princess Mingzhu's wishes, it would be really bad. Even if he was unwilling, he was aware of his situation, so he had to leave. It was also because he could not use the token in the central area, so Shen Jinyi could only rely on his own strength to get out of here and leave the tomb of the god of sin. As for whether Shen Jinyi chose to leave the tomb of the god of sin after leaving Heaven Peak Mountain, it was his own business. Nobody could force him to do so. After all, Princess Mingzhu could only suggest and would not force him to do so. Moreover, she did not have the leisure to escort him. Although Shen Jinyi was not very powerful, most of the powerful undead spirits were already dead. Even if he could not deal with some of them, it would not be a problem for him to escape. On the other hand, Xiaoyang was still comprehending the second stone tablet. He did not feel much about the departure of the people around him. After a period of time, Yang Sun and Li Chunyi walked together and headed outside. They had worked together in the 10 Directions 8 Wastelands map before, so their temperaments could be considered compatible. Therefore, they chose to travel together. They had obtained some opportunities on Heaven Peak Mountain, but they had to leave due to their own states. However, they had also obtained a lot of benefits previously, so they felt that they should stop before going too far. Sometimes, if they were too greedy, they would definitely have to pay a price. Moreover, the price would definitely not be small. Therefore, they were very clear about how they should weigh and choose, so they did not dare to be careless. Gradually, Luo Ku was the one who left. Of course, this was also a very normal thing. If one's strength was strong enough, one could stay for a period of time. Gradually, the number of people on Heaven Peak Mountain became fewer and fewer, and the opportunities inside were also quickly divided up. Among them, the most outstanding one was Princess Mingzhu. What she had shown was no different from taking by force or trickery. During this period of time, she had also comprehended 4 methods. Her speed was so fast that it made people envious. Nothing could be more blessed than this. Presumably, after leaving the tomb of the god of sin, Princess Mingzhu would become stronger than before. Chapter 1834. It could be said that every time the divine tomb opened, someone would be favored. This time it was Princess Mingzhu. She had gotten so many opportunities that she could succeed in whatever she wanted to learn as long as she could find it. Although Xiaoyang was not very lucky, he was not bad either. He managed to comprehend 2 methods. The first one was swordsmanship, while the second one was used to nurture qi. It was an assistive method, but it was very practical. Something that could be left in heaven's top mountain was naturally not an ordinary thing. The subtleties of it still needed to be carefully comprehended in order to understand. Xiaoyang sat outside to rest. At the same time, he also felt the subtleties of the qi nurturing method. It was a pity that the place was full of dead qi, so it could not be used. Xiaoyang also understood this technique very simply and thoroughly. It was used to increase the speed of absorbing spiritual qi, and it could help increase the growth of one's cultivation level by 1 step. Sometimes, the situation might be completely different if one was just a step faster. Although he could not display the subtleties of the method yet, he would be able to find out after he left the divine tomb. Before long, a white-robed, jade-faced man walked over and sat down next to Xiaoyang. He hugged his sword and looked a little lonely. Xiaoyang looked sideways and asked, "What's wrong? Is there something on your mind?" The man nodded and looked at heaven's top mountain as if he was worried about something. He seemed to be hesitant. Xiaoyang felt helpless when he saw that. He did not know what his friend was worried about, so he dared not speak rashly. After a long time, Bai Jian said, "I'm leaving the divine tomb." Instantly, Xiaoyang couldn't help but be stunned. Bai Jian's cultivation level was not low, so it would not be a problem for him to stay in the divine tomb for at least a year. However, the fact that he wanted to leave the divine tomb now was rather puzzling. Bai Jian was such a person who was very carefree. "There's no need to think too much about it. I just feel that I've obtained enough things here." Therefore, even if he continued to stay, there was not much meaning to it. Moreover, my sword Tao lies in its profundity. Don't bite off more than you can chew. You might as well go out and ponder over what you've learned, Bai Jian said indifferently. Stop before going too far. This was Bai Jian's opinion. Moreover, he was also very satisfied with the opportunities he had obtained. In fact, it had far exceeded his expectations. Therefore, leaving now was the best choice for him. Xiaoyang also smiled knowingly. It was indeed not bad for Bai Jian to be so carefree. Knowing when to advance and when to retreat was naturally a good thing. After all, too many people became tomb keepers because of greed. In the end, they lost their physical bodies and could only drift in this world as dead spirits. But I'm very worried about you. Now that Lei Dingtian's injuries are almost healed, if he attacks you. Bai Jian hesitated and did not continue. Although Bai Jian knew that Xiaoyang was powerful, he was still a little worried and afraid that something would happen. By then, when he left the divine tomb, it would be too far away for him to help. Xiaoyang smiled indifferently and said, "Do you know why Lei Dingtian did not come to meet you?" Bai Jian was stunned. He also felt that it was a little strange. Although he came later, with the holy lightning hammer in his hand, he could tell at a glance that Xiaoyang had used it to make a deal. However, the deal was already over. It was normal for them to fight again. I had a fight with him before. In the end, both of us were injured. However, he was poisoned by me and could not be cured, so he could not come, Xiaoyang said indifferently. Suddenly, the corner of Bai Jian's mouth could not help but twitch. He felt very uncomfortable when he saw that his friend actually said it so casually. If someone else had said such a thing, Bai Jian would definitely not have believed it. However, he believed what Xiaoyang said. Back then, he was able to kill Tian Bonu, so it was not impossible for him to fight with Lei Dingtian until both of them were injured. Bai Jian slowly gave a thumbs up. Now, it seemed that he was overthinking and worried about things that he did not need to worry about. If that's the case, then I have nothing more to say. I think you should know that it's not good to stay here for long. When we get out, let's have a good drink, Bai Jian said as he stood up and patted the dust off his clothes. Xiaoyang nodded and said, "It's a deal." "All right." After saying that, Bai Jian walked forward. With his back facing Xiaoyang, he waved his hand, indicating that he did not need to send him off. Soon after, a sharp light flashed by, and Bai Jian left on his sword. He was very confident. After watching Bai Jian leave, Xiaoyang turned and entered Heaven-Top Mountain. Since Bai Jian had already left and had chosen to stop before going too far, he would not stay any longer. Of course, he still wanted to try his luck and see if he could make any progress. Perhaps to Bai Jian, being vigorous was the most important thing. He would not bite off more than he could chew. However, to Xiaoyang the more the better. As he had lived 2 lives, he was able to see through many things. Hence, it did not take him too long to comprehend them. Hence, if he was lucky, he could still gain something. Xiaoyang did not ask Bai Jian what opportunities he had in Heaven-Top Mountain. However, if it was not enough to shock people, why would he leave just like that? Time passed slowly. Some of the people had obtained things that they were satisfied with, so they left satisfied. At that moment, there were only 5 people left in Heaven-Top Mountain. Princess Mingzhu obviously did not act unless she saw a rabbit, or she wanted to take all the opportunities in Heaven-Top Mountain. Hence, she was the fastest and obtained the most. However, she did not seem to have any intention of leaving. After comprehending 2 more techniques, Xiaoyang slowly got up and walked out again. According to his estimation, he was close to the best time of 3 years. Moreover, he was very satisfied with the technique that he comprehended later on. Back then, when Bai Jian left, he also felt very satisfied. After leaving Heaven's Peak Mountain, Lin Fan looked at the gloomy sky and felt the pressure in his heart gradually lessen. Instead, it was replaced by a relaxed mood. This was because as long as he left this place, the oppression would no longer exist. Hence, Xiaoyang was ready to leave this place. Chapter 1835. This year, regardless of whether it was the God realm or the entire trichiliocosm, was a huge year. It was a great year for geniuses to emerge in large numbers. Although some of them had failed in the tomb of the god of sin and disappeared without a trace, those who came out had benefited greatly and improved their abilities by leaps and bounds. It could be said that this made everyone in the divine realm extremely happy. There were even quite a number of people who were overjoyed after winning their bets. In the future, their status in the divine realm would definitely rise as a result. However, as the situation changed endlessly, some people's thoughts began to change. That was because those who came out at the beginning had some fortuitous encounters that were dozens of times better than the ordinary cultivators. However, what happened next made many people very upset. For example, Shen Luo, who ranked first on the Hidden Dragon leaderboard, went into seclusion immediately after he came out of seclusion. In less than a month, he had already reached the rank 9 realm of King Wu. He was still ranked first on the Hidden Dragon leaderboard. Shen Luo's reputation skyrocketed again. Everyone seemed to have forgotten about their regrets in the grand competition. Perhaps to them, it did not matter if they did not win the grand competition. After all, breaking through the shackles of King Wu's rank 8 was the most important thing. In the realm of the gods, if one wanted to stand out, one had to break through the rank 8 realm and step into the rank 9 realm. Only then would one have the confidence to speak. It could be said that even if the cultivators in the realm of the gods were not very talented, it was only a matter of time before they reached the rank 8 realm as long as they were willing to cultivate diligently. However, many cultivators who were hailed as geniuses did not manage to take another step forward in their entire lives. Xin Fian even went into seclusion after she came out of the tomb of the god of sin. It was said that she had gained a lot, and it was only a matter of time before she reached the rank 9 realm. When this news spread out, it immediately caused a huge uproar in the divine world. Some aristocratic families, especially, felt hopeless. Princess Mingzhu was one thing, but then there was Shen Wushuang. Now, even Xin Fian was going to have a place in the realm of the gods. How could they feel good? Fortunately, Jiang Feiyun came out of the tomb of the god of sin and went into seclusion for half a month and successfully broke through to the rank 9 realm. At the very least, the Imperials wouldn't be able to devour all the fortune. Otherwise, these nobles would not be able to raise their heads in front of the royal family in the future. It could be said that they all knew that as long as Princess Mingzhu was around, they would not be able to steal the limelight. Jiang Feiyun was merely a consolation. Of course, most of the discussions were about whether or not Divine Confusion, who had broken through to the 9th stage, would be able to beat up the champion. Many people were talking about this matter enthusiastically. Furthermore, they began to discuss it intensely. All of them were enjoying it. The 3-year deadline was quickly approaching. Gradually, many cultivators came out one after another. It could be said that some were happy while others were sad. Some had improved quite a bit, such as Shen Wan and Xin Feiyan. They had benefited greatly, and their strength had increased by leaps and bounds. However, some people weren't so lucky. For example, Lu Qianshen, Xin Jinyi, and the others. Although they also had some gains, they were really lacking compared to Xin Luo and Jiang Feiyin. Although these people had entered the divine tomb, whether or not they had buried the opportunity to enter the 9th level was still a different matter. Therefore, many people were not optimistic about it. Although Shen Jinyi's performance was mediocre, no one was paying attention to them. The reason why it was said to be a big year was very simple. If Xin Feiyan, who was so talented, could have such an extraordinary opportunity, then what about the others? It could be said that most people in the divine realm had their eyes on Princess Mingzhu and Shen Wushuang. They could be said to have entered the 9th level of King Wu before entering the divine tomb. It was very likely that they could enter that level. Therefore, this was what people were looking forward to the most. Not to mention the divine realm, there were 3 geniuses who had entered the 9th level in the outside world. Would they be able to enter that level? Even if they were not lucky, they would not be too far off. After Li Chuanyi and Yang Sun came out, a shocking secret news spread. It was that Han Fenglu from the Greenly world had set up a trap to kill many geniuses and was preparing to control Princess Mingzhu. After this news spread, the world was shocked. Many people found it hard to believe. Although the Greenly world was second only to the divine realm among the 3,000 minor worlds, the difference between the 2 worlds could be described as the difference between heaven and earth. As for them, they were really audacious. However, they could not believe what the 2 of them said. However, after Bai Jian and Luo Ku came out, they also reported this to the divine realm. Suddenly, the entire divine realm was enraged. They did not expect the Greenly world to have such wild ambitions. Suddenly, the entire imperial court was united. They were ready to conquer the Greenly world as soon as the divine emperor gave the order. They wanted to let them know that the divine realm was not a place where anyone could scheme against. After the divine realm found out about this shocking conspiracy, it seemed like everything had been put aside for the time being. They even pointed the spearhead at the Greenly world. When the various sects in the Greenly world heard this news, they were instantly panicking. This was because they knew that what they were about to face next would be a disaster. However, very quickly, some people thought of what happened in the Thousand Thunder realm and pushed the sect that Han Fenglu was in. Obviously, they wanted them to take responsibility for this matter. Of course, although this matter involved a lot, there were very few people who planned it. After all, there were some things that the fewer people who knew about, the safer it would be. However, the divine emperor still did not say a word. He did not express his opinion on this matter. For a moment, many people began to mutter in their hearts, "What the hell is going on? It's really hard to figure it out." And because the divine realm had not expressed their opinion, the Greenly world did not dare to act rashly. However, at the same time, their hearts were in turmoil. They felt like there was a huge knife hanging over their heads. They did not know when it would fall and cut off their heads. Such days could be said to be very difficult to bear. Some people were even on the verge of collapse. At this time, the person who broke the stalemate left the divine tomb and returned to the palace to cultivate in seclusion. Few people knew about it. Chapter 1836. After exiting the tomb of the god of sin, Xiaoyang took a deep breath as he felt the rich spiritual energy coming from the land. He felt refreshed all of a sudden. As for the depression and unhappiness from before, they were all gone now. All that was left was a sense of pride and nostalgia. Although he still did not know what exactly happened in the tomb of the god of sin, he had a rough idea of what happened. As for what exactly happened, he was not prepared to delve into it. Instead, he returned to the king's residence and occupied the cultivation space that Shen Wushuang used. Yang Sun was still in closed-door cultivation. Clearly, he needed time to digest everything, so the king was the one who received him this time. The king did not say much about it. Instead, he told Xiaoyang to do what he did in the past and not to worry about anything. The king also had some matters to attend to. After a few words, he left. The reason why the king specially received Xiaoyang was very simple. He wanted to know what happened in the tomb of the god of sin and verify some details. As expected, it was almost the same as what Yang Sun and Li Chunyi said. In this way, the Greenly realm would truly have an answer to this question. Moreover, even Bai Jian had spoken. It was unlikely that these people would gang up to frame him. Although they were well aware of the truth and found it hard to believe, they could not deny it. That was because sometimes when a person went crazy, he could do anything. However, it was hard to believe that he did not succeed. If he had succeeded, the consequences would have been unimaginable. After the king left, Xiaoyang did not think too much about it. Instead, he returned to the cultivation room. What Green Li World Han Fenglu did next would naturally be cleaned up by the God Realm. Naturally, he did not have to worry about anything else. In the cultivation room, as the qi was drawn, the formation began to operate. In an instant, the majestic spiritual energy began to rapidly pour into Xiaoyang's body. Although the amount of spiritual energy was huge, it was like a clay ox entering the sea. The supply could not meet the demand. Xiaoyang even used the cultivation method that he had learned from the tomb of the god of sin. All of a sudden, the spiritual qi was sucked dry, and all of it gathered in his body. In the divine tomb, Xiaoyang's consumption was enormous, but he could only rely on medicinal pills to support himself. However, the supply of medicinal pills was ultimately limited. Moreover, the daily consumption was not small either. The missing spiritual energy was replenished at this moment. However, it would take some time for him to fully recover. Moreover, Xiaoyang also used more of his power to expel the death aura from his body. He was very careful. Although his defense was very good, it was inevitable that he would suffer some corrosion in such an environment. No matter who it was, this was unavoidable. With the passage of time, Xiaoyang's condition began to gradually recover. In just a short while, he had regained his vitality. At the same time, Xiaoyang also began to break through to the 9th stage of King Wu. After spending 3 years in the Tomb of the Gods and fighting several battles, he could have made a breakthrough a long time ago. However, due to the uniqueness of the Tomb of the Gods, he was unable to make a breakthrough. Therefore, he had been suppressing his own realm. Right now, Xiaoyang was also looking forward to his breakthrough this time around. He was looking forward to seeing how much his strength would increase after this breakthrough. This was the so-called good preparation. At the same time, Xiaoyang also felt that he would gain a lot from this breakthrough. However, in a mansion in the east of Fairy's capital, Sword Aura suddenly soared into the sky. The sharp aura was even more uncontrollable. For a moment, many people's gazes were cast in that direction. Such a majestic and sharp sword will made many people yearn for it. As for those who were able to brew such a sword in tent, they were all well aware that other than the jade-faced white sword from the Sky Sword Realm, there was probably no one else. The elder of the Sky Sword Realm had left the God Realm long ago. Therefore, the only possibility was Bai Jian. A huge shadow of a treasured sword was emitting a cold light in the sky. The sword aura was also constantly crisscrossing. Everywhere it passed, it could be said to be full of scars. At this moment, an old man in luxurious clothes suddenly soared into the sky and pressed down with his hand. Immediately, the raging sword aura was suppressed at this moment. It no longer destroyed the buildings. However, the old man was having a hard time holding on. It was obvious that it was very difficult for him to suppress such a sharp sword aura. Fortunately, when he was unable to hold on, 2 more people appeared. With the 3 of them working together, they were able to completely suppress the sword aura and prevent it from rampaging and causing more damage. They were also used to this kind of thing. During this period of time when those powerful geniuses were breaking through, it was inevitable that some strange phenomena would occur. However, they were able to suppress it by themselves. They did not expect Bai Jian to cause such a huge commotion. Fortunately, everyone had seen the world and knew the pros and cons. Therefore, they took action in time and there were no casualties. In the imperial city, in a pavilion, the god emperor placed his hands on the city wall. He looked up and saw the shining sword. The corner of his mouth curled into a smile. Behind the god emperor stood several people. Those that were able to stand there were all core characters of the divine realm. It could be said that if they wanted to change something, it would be very easy for them to do so if they worked together. Those people were the King Mansion's King, Xin Qian. Behind him was King Zhao. Beside King Zhao stood a man in golden armor. His appearance gave off a sense of uprightness and plainness. His armor was especially dazzling. That man was King Qin, who guarded the border of the divine realm all year round. Although he was not famous in the divine realm, everyone knew that he possessed frightening strength. The divine realm's 3 kings were all gathered here. Behind the 3 kings was the Prime Minister, Jiang Zhangqing. He was sitting on a chair with a leisurely appearance. It was as if he did not care about anything at all. Beside Jiang Zhangqing sat an old man. That old man had a drowsy appearance. It was as if he did not care about what was happening here. In fact, that old man even began to drink tea. He had a happy and contented appearance. It was as if even if the sky were to collapse before him, he would not bother to take a glance at it. It was as if his turbid eyes had already seen too many things. Thus, no matter what kind of change he faced, he would not care about it at all. Chapter 1837. I didn't expect Bai Jian to have such a spirit intent. I'm afraid he will also reach that level in the future, the Celestial Emperor said with a smile. His eyes were filled with admiration, because what he saw was an extremely pure sword intent, without the slightest bit of sloppiness. The power of such a sword should not be underestimated once it was unsheathed. King Da, who was beside him, glanced at it but did not express his opinion. He could naturally feel it too, but there were some things that could not be envied. This point was very clear and no one could change it. King Zhao, on the other hand, glanced at it and did not seem to care. This was because his son, Xin Luo, had already reached the 9th level. Although it was a pity that he had come out too early, his harvest was still not bad. This kid is not bad indeed, but he seems to have used up all the luck of the Sky Sword realm. Look, Li Chuanyi is below Bai Jian, but compared to Bai Jian, he is worlds apart, the old man said indifferently. As soon as he said this, everyone could only laugh helplessly. They naturally understood the logic behind this. Currently, Bai Jian could be said to be the only one in the Heaven Sword realm. His imposing figure was enough to make many people live under his shadow, making it difficult for them to make a comeback. I don't think so. The Sky Sword realm is a strange place. Who knows when that silly kid will figure it out and become the second Bai Jian? The golden-armored King Qin said quietly. No one refuted, because they all understood the Sky Sword realm too well. It was a double-edged sword. It was powerful, but it had a fatal flaw, which was that its defense was too weak. Of course, to those people, the sharpest offense was defense. They seemed to turn a blind eye to everything else and did not even take it to heart. It could be said that the Sky Sword realm was a place that went to extremes. If one walked well, they would be walking on an unconventional path. If one walked poorly, they would be nothing at all. I wonder how the Sun-Snow Realm's harvest is, the Celestial Emperor said helplessly with a sigh. There weren't many people from the Sun-Snow Realm who had entered the divine tomb this time. However, people were still looking forward to what kind of harvest they would obtain. As for the Greenly Realm, no one mentioned it because everyone had died in the divine tomb. As for what would happen to them in the end, it didn't matter. In their hearts, they had already removed the name of the Greenly Realm. What kind of improvement do you think Xiaoyang will have after coming out this time around? The divine emperor gave it some thought and asked with great interest. Upon hearing this name, King Zhao coldly snorted. Clearly, he was very dissatisfied with this new chief. The king thought for a moment and said, "Conservatively speaking, the early 9th level is already in the bag." This was still a relatively humble way of putting it. This was because when the king met with Xiaoyang, he had already sensed that the aura leaking out was difficult to suppress. Unfortunately, he didn't have much strength in his body. Otherwise, he would have been able to sense it even more clearly. The God Emperor, on the other hand, did not say anything. In his opinion, as long as the previous leaders were able to walk out of the divine tomb alive, which one of them did not directly step into the 9th tier. Furthermore, it was a big year now. It would be strange if Xiaoyang did not enter the 9th tier. Beside him, King Qin rubbed his palms together, and there was a hint of fighting spirit in his eyes. The King of Qin had only returned after learning about what had happened in the Greenly Realm. His purpose was to test his own strength by using them as an example. With regards to the chief, Xiaoyang, he had also heard a lot about him. In particular, after learning about the conspiracy in the divine tomb, he had a higher opinion of the young man. He felt that fighting with such an opponent was the most satisfying thing in the world. The God Emperor glanced at him and said, "Be honest. Xiaoyang is still young. Are you planning to bully him by looking for him now?" King Qin smiled faintly when he heard this. He did not intend to continue on this topic. He also knew very well that Xiaoyang was indeed very good. It was a pity that they were not from the same era. Otherwise, when the time came, they would definitely be able to fight to their heart's content. Jiang Zhangqing did not say anything from the beginning to the end. It was as if he did not feel the need to say or do anything about this matter. The old man took a sip of tea, looked around, and said, "Xiaoyang joining our god realm is not bad either. Why should the God Emperor be so worried?" Many people were taken aback by this sudden statement. The meaning behind this was really worth pondering over. After all, Xiaoyang was the chief of this grand competition. None of them would have any objections if he were to be accepted into the god realm. As for the grudges from before, they could reconcile and even make up for it. There was no harm in that. "I'm afraid he won't be willing." The God Emperor sighed and said. King Zhao frowned slightly when he heard this. Was Xiaoyang still so arrogant that he dared to reject the invitation of the God realm? King Da, on the other hand, still looked indifferent. He knew very well that Xiaoyang was a person who valued relationships very much. If he could go against Han Fenglu for the sake of unrivaled God and Bai Jian, then perhaps he would also refuse to join the God realm for the sake of his own world. The old man put down his teacup and glanced at them, saying, "Does he have the right to replace the Greenly world?" When he said this, King Zhao and King Qin were stunned for a moment before coming back to their senses. It turned out that the God Emperor was worried about this matter. It could be said that the Greenly world was the strongest mini-world after the God realm. Wanting to replace it with Xiaoyang's drifting cloud realm was really a bit of a fantasy. This was also the thing that the God Emperor was most worried about. He had this idea, but he could not make up his mind. If he really did that, it would be a complete gamble. And it was a huge gamble. It's still early. Why don't we settle the matter of the Greenly world first? Since they've offended the dignity of the God realm. Then it's enough to make them pay the price, the old man said calmly and put down his teacup. Jiang Zhangqing remained silent. He looked at the old man and found it difficult to speak. When the God Emperor heard this, he nodded slightly and turned around, saying, "Fourth brother, then I'll have to trouble you to make a trip to the Greenly world. Just deal with it according to your plan. There's no need to worry." All right. When King Qin heard this, his eyes lit up with a desire to fight. He had wanted to make a move for a long time. Now that such a good opportunity had fallen into his hands, he was naturally very excited. Suddenly, the God Emperor felt a throbbing in his heart. His gaze fell on King Da's residence. Chapter 1838. The God Emperor narrowed his eyes as he sensed the changes in the palace. Soon after, a smile appeared on his face. He didn't expect that the outsider would break through so quickly after returning. Although this was a very normal thing, it was still much faster than Shenluo and the others. However, each had its own advantages, which would be revealed in the future. There was no point in making any assertions now. At the same time, the God Emperor also thought highly of the current chief. No one had discovered the Greenly realm's wild ambitions. However, this outsider had made sufficient preparations and had a countermeasure. That was why he was able to turn the tide and break out of this hopeless situation. Although Chu Chengfeng of the God Realm had lost his life because of this, the God Emperor felt that this was a sacrifice that was expected and unavoidable. After all, to be able to protect the majority of the people under such a calamity was already very difficult. If not for this person, the God Realm would have fallen into the hands of others thousands of years later. As for why Xiaoyang did not reveal this earlier, the God Emperor could also understand. Although Xiao Yang's reputation had soared because he had won first place, and his words had more or less weight, Xiao Yang's words still carried some weight. However, compared to Han Fenglu, he was still lacking. When the time came, with Han Fenglu's influence, Xiaoyang would not be able to protect himself. Sometimes influence and weight were very important because these things were deeply ingrained in many people's hearts. They were very willing to trust a person that they were more familiar with. Of course, this was also due to the trust in strength. However, this trust would often become the root of disaster. No matter how one looked at it, Xiaoyang's handling of the situation was very beautiful. Whether it was using the Holy Lightning Hammer as a trade for Lei Dingtian's help or killing Han Fenglu, or dealing with Sumu Hua, everything was done beautifully. Of course, the ultimate victory was still the high-grade heavenly fire. If not for the heavenly fire, they would not have been able to control Sumu Hua, and the end result would still be terrible. This made the God Emperor ponder over it. What was the situation with the heavenly fire? Why did he only take it out at that point? Or perhaps he had some difficulties? As for seeing through the Greenly realm scheme, the God Emperor did not find it strange at all, because he felt that this was an extremely normal thing. This kid even dared to investigate his 10 directions, 8 wastelands map, which showed how strong his soul was. If there was anything wrong, he would naturally be able to detect it. Therefore, it was not bad to pretend to be controlled and beat them at their own game to break the situation. Whether it was courage or character, the God Emperor was very satisfied. Thus, he really wanted to pull this person into the immortal realm. When the time was right, the 3 people that he valued would join forces, and perhaps they would become the second Princess Mingzhu. The Qin king was still immersed in the joy of receiving the order. In his opinion, his duty was to guard the borders, but almost no one dared to disturb him. Even if there were, they were just some insignificant people who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. They wouldn't be able to withstand a single palm strike from him. Therefore, there wasn't much meaning to it. But this time, he could really show his prowess in the crusade against the Greenly world. Then, who will the extra vacancy in the Greenly world go to? Or are you not going to bring another small world to play with? The old man thought for a moment, then asked. The God Emperor frowned slightly. Their immortal realm had long allied with the Greenly world, the Sun Snow world, and the Heaven Sword realm. It was also because of this that these 3 small worlds had so many spots. Their original intention was to choose 4 allies, so the remaining ally would depend on which small world performed better after this grand competition. In the end, They returned disappointed because almost all the benefits had been taken by them. Not only did they not gain another ally, but they also had to kill one with their own hands. "It doesn't matter," the God Emperor said calmly. The Qin king nodded solemnly and said, "I think that although there are some powerful people in the other small worlds, what they can do is just add flowers to brocade. As for whether they can provide timely help, that's another matter." They were all well aware of this. Apart from the few small worlds with rich characteristics and deep foundations, the other small worlds didn't look too bad, but they still wouldn't be of much use. King Zhao and King De kept their mouths shut. They had also tried to do this, but after a long period of investigation, they felt that it was a little too weak to be satisfactory. It wouldn't be of much use to their big plans. Therefore, trying to rope him in would only result in an extremely disproportionate amount of effort and reward. "God Emperor, I know what you're thinking, but can that young man really meet our expectations?" The old man's expression became much more serious. As soon as he said this, King Zhao frowned, and the look in his eyes changed greatly. The divine emperor still appeared relaxed as he smiled and said, "Old Prime Minister, how far do you think this lad will be able to break through in one go this time around?" He said this very casually, as if he was joking. The old man glanced at him, then said calmly, "I think this kid has been accumulating for a long time, and now he's flushed with success. I'm afraid he'll directly reach the peak of the 9th level." These words were said lightly, as if it was very simple. But one had to know that in the God realm, wanting to break through the shackles of the 8th level to reach the 9th level was already very difficult. If he took 3 consecutive steps and directly reached the peak, that would be really shocking. So what if this current chief reached the peak of the 9th level in one step? Even if he was given a few more decades, I'm afraid he won't be able to compare to the 4 generals, the old man said calmly. In the God realm, below the God Emperor, the battle power on the surface was the 3 kings and 4 divine generals. The 3 kings were Shen Qian's 3 brothers, and they were all existences that surpassed King Wu's realm. As for the 4 divine generals, although they were still at the peak of the 9th level, they had experienced hundreds of battles, and were the peak of the peak. They already had half a foot in that realm, and as long as there was an opportunity, they could enter that realm at any time. The 4 divine generals had been at the peak realm for 1,000 years, and could be said to be the extreme, the peak. When King Zhao heard this, he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. If that kid was really so ferocious, then it would really be a little scary. In my opinion, he will stop his footsteps when he reaches the peak of the 9th level, and won't be greedy and advance rashly. The God Emperor still had an indifferent look, as if he was very certain. Chapter 1839. Instantly, the old man's expression froze. He could naturally feel that the outsider was madly absorbing spiritual energy. Based on this momentum, coupled with his extraordinary determination, he could indeed reach the pinnacle in one step. Although there would inevitably be some problems with such a radical approach, it was no longer important. All he needed to do now was cultivate properly and everything would be smoothed out. However, in the face of such a huge temptation, could the young man really resist the opportunity to reach the pinnacle in one step? In his opinion, it was a little unrealistic. Among the 9 ranks, even if it was only a small realm, it would take more time to cultivate than a large realm in the martial king realm. King Zhao's frown deepened because he felt that his child had finally reached the next realm after much difficulty and could finally turn things around. However, from the looks of it now, it still seemed impossible. Moreover, he was being suppressed by more than one head. King Da, on the other hand, was still as calm as an ancient well. It was as if to him, this was all there was to it. Any kind of ending was acceptable. The God Emperor took note of everyone's expressions. His finger tapped lightly on the city wall as if he was thinking about something. King Qin had a strong fighting spirit. It was obvious that he had a lot of expectations for this young man. As for Jiang Zhangqing, he held the teapot and looked as if he was deep in thought. 3rd brother, Follow forth, brother, to the greenly world, the God Emperor said after some thought. When King Zhao heard this, he wanted to refute. However, when he saw the God Emperor's imposing and irresistible look, he immediately changed his tone and said, "Yes, sir." Zhao Wang knew very well that the Celestial Emperor was just trying to send him away. This was really making a mountain out of a molehill. Although he resented the young man, he would not go so far as to ignore the rules of the God realm and attack him. Don't worry too much. It's just that Shima is very talented. He just lacks some real experience. Therefore, it's a good thing to let him go on this crusade against the greenly world, the God Emperor said with a smile. King Zhao's words were about to come out of his mouth, but he immediately stopped. Then he thought about it from another angle and realized that it made sense. The God Emperor thought for a moment before saying, "If that child Yongsun can still make it after he comes out of seclusion, tell him to go as well." The king was more indifferent about this. Back then, when his eldest son wanted to leave the divine realm to investigate the matter of the airship, he naturally knew the reason. Therefore, he didn't try to stop them. Therefore, in his opinion, this matter was still feasible. "Let's see if this child has the chance to catch up," King De said with an indifferent expression. Xin Qian saw this very clearly. Although it was said that cultivating in the God realm was the God realm was the best place to cultivate. However, in the end, it was still lacking a bit of flavor. Cultivation that didn't go through the baptism of blood was just for show. On the other hand, King Zhao remained silent. Although he was unhappy, he could not voice it out. This was because there were many things that couldn't be said out loud. However, he admired his big brother very much. He knew that the arrangements he made were naturally the best. "When are we going to set off?" Qin Wang asked impatiently. Now, Qin Wang was full of fighting spirit. He couldn't wait to rush to the greenly world and have a great battle with those old farts. He wanted to fight to his heart's content and vent all the fighting spirit that he had accumulated over the years. Of course, Qin Wang was still angry about this matter. How could the dignity of the God realm be violated by others? Moreover, what Han Fenglu did was to encroach on the God realm. She even wanted to control it in her own hands. Such thoughts were enough to consign him and his sect to eternal damnation. The God Emperor thought for a moment and said, "We'll set off in 3 days. Go and prepare now." "Understood." Qin Wang cupped his fists and bowed. Then he turned around and walked down. Now, Qin Wang was indeed a little impatient. Although he didn't think that there was a need to prepare anything to deal with the greenly world. However, after careful consideration, he felt that this was indeed a good opportunity to train. Selecting those outstanding juniors was indeed a little troublesome. As for the important matters that needed to be discussed, in Qin Wang's eyes he was just a person who would charge and break through enemy lines. As for the troublesome matters, he would leave it to them. Towards his fourth brother's carefree personality, the God Emperor only smiled faintly. He understood these people too well. However, it was also because of this that he liked his fourth brother the most. He didn't beat around the bush and was just as straightforward. The old man, sitting on the chair, slowly stood up and walked to the God Emperor's side. He raised his head and looked in the direction of the palace. Not long after, there was a natural phenomenon. Suddenly, thunderclouds filled the sky and rumbled continuously. The sound of it was quite frightening. In an instant, 2 people appeared. They immediately acted to suppress the thunderclouds and prevent them from gathering too quickly. In fact, they might even go berserk and hurt the people around them. I didn't expect to start breaking through to the greater success stage so soon. The old man's tone was as calm as ever. It was as if everything was going according to his expectations. Thunder and lightning roared and flashed. In an instant, the sound of it grew louder and louder. The 2 guards gradually showed signs of being unable to hold on. Fortunately, 2 of his comrades made a move in time, and they managed to turn the situation around a lot. However, even with the 4 of them working together, they were still unable to suppress it. Only with the addition of one more person did they manage to stabilize it. Seeing this, the corner of Zhao Wang's mouth twitched involuntarily. The 5 of them were barely able to suppress this phenomenon. From this, it could be seen how powerful this person was. At the same time, Zhao Wang was very puzzled. Xiaoyang wasn't someone of the 1,000 lightning realm. Why would the phenomenon of his breakthrough be thunder and lightning? Also, why didn't the phenomenon appear at the first level? Instead, why was the second level so earth-shattering? He couldn't figure it out no matter how much he thought about it. Looks like this kid has a lot of secrets. His phenomenon is thunder and lightning. In the divine tomb, the key to victory is the heavenly fire. As the old man spoke, his originally cloudy eyes became much brighter. Normally, most cultivators would only choose one attribute to cultivate and reach the peak. However, Xiaoyang was different. He didn't bite off more than he could chew. Instead, he seemed to have cultivated well in every attribute and was very proficient in it. Looking at the bolts of thunder and lightning, everyone was even more puzzled. How did this kid do it? Chapter 1840. The smile on the God Emperor's face grew wider as he looked at the strange phenomenon. This was because he felt that this young man did not disappoint him. The commotion caused by breaking through 2 levels in a row was not small. Furthermore, the lightning phenomenon was still growing stronger. Even the 5 guards would not be able to suppress it. As expected, 2 more guards went up in a short while. Only then did they suppress the phenomenon slightly and prevent the formation from collapsing. This strange phenomenon caused many people to raise their eyebrows. It was hard for them to imagine just how powerful this outsider's explosive power was to be able to trigger such a powerful phenomenon. The old man's eyes became much brighter. There was even a hint of passion in them. He felt that this young man was strange all over. At the same time, he was also an existence that could not be underestimated. Who would have thought that it was just a minor breakthrough of the 9th tier that was all, and it could actually cause such a huge commotion? This was truly a little inconceivable. The last time such a phenomenon appeared, it was caused by the hope of the god realm, Princess Mingzhu. Right now, Xiaoyang's attitude was almost the same as before. Could it be that this was the second Princess Mingzhu? When the old man thought of this, he could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. If this was really the case, this person was really someone that the god realm wanted to recruit. However, the God Emperor's idea was really a little too whimsical. That was why all of them gathered here to discuss this matter. However, all of them were against it. After all, a remote flowing cloud world was too weak. It was not qualified to be their ally. However, Xiaoyang was an exception. However, if they were to form an alliance with a small world just to recruit a person, it would be too generous. At least, from their point of view, it was not worth it. There was not much meaning. Even if the Greenly world was heavily damaged by the God Realm, it was still much stronger than the Flowing Cloud world. However, judging from Xiaoyang's current performance, it would not be a problem for him to bring people from his sect to settle down here. At the very most, they would just have to give up the land of a city. This man was worth the price. At this moment, Jiang Zhangqing also slowly walked over. Looking at the lightning phenomenon, his brows furrowed. Although their eyes were filled with envy, they could only shake their heads and sigh in the end. At the same time, he was also wondering why the God Emperor was so insistent. I've gone to the Flowing Cloud world to learn about it. It's just a remote place. Previously, King Wu was already a top-notch existence when he was only at Tier 5. Even the Devil Realm, which had been crippled by us for tens of thousands of years, was enough to poop on their heads, the old man said after some thought. The God Emperor remained silent and did not say anything. After seeing Xiaoyang and knowing that he was the person who invaded his 10 directions, 8 wasteland map with divine sense, he began to investigate. He also had some understanding of the Flowing Cloud world. That place was truly rather backward. If it wasn't for the appearance of Xiaoyang, this monster, that place would probably still be a pool of stagnant water. Even though some new blood had been added, The highest realm among them was only King Wu's 8th step. Moreover, that was only a handful of existences. King Wu's 8th step was only the most ordinary existence in the God realm. However, at the same time, the God Emperor also discovered something very interesting. That was, ever since Xiao Yang arrived at the upper realm of the flowing cloud world and established his own force, that pool of stagnant water had been revived. The speed at which those cultivators improved was also not slow. Sometimes a small world was just this mysterious. As long as there was an anomaly that could break the shackles, with the first person walking on that path, then gradually more people would walk on that path. Therefore, this was not strange at all. Therefore, the God Emperor was also looking forward to seeing how the remote flowing cloud world would rise under the influence of Xiaoyang. This was indeed a question worth pondering. Even if there are existences like Xiaoyang, how many of them are there? When the time comes, what's the point of spending so much effort to rope in people who are not of great use? The old man's tone had also changed. He was no longer as polite as before. King Zhao was smiling. He felt a little pleased when he heard the old man talking to his big brother in this manner. They had been educated by this old man since they were young. Even now, when the God realm was already their world, the old man's words still carried weight and made people revere him. The God Emperor listened humbly as his brows furrowed slightly. "We are looking for an ally, not a subordinate world," the God Emperor suddenly said. Because of the arrogance of the God realm since ancient times, there were many things that had quietly changed. In fact, many people were so arrogant that they were nothing, but still felt that they were a cut above others. This was the most laughable point. The God Emperor was naturally clear about the drawbacks of the God realm. However, how could it be easy to change it? This was not something that could be done in a short period of time. However, this was no longer important. In his opinion, those arrogance would be destroyed in no time. Therefore, he naturally did not have to care so much now. "Ally? You're not even qualified to be a subordinate world," the old man said angrily and rolled his eyes at the God Emperor. The God Emperor was still smiling bitterly. Naturally, he knew the old man's temperament. However, he had already made up his mind. He was just trying to persuade them now. Of course, if the God Emperor wanted to force a decision, he could naturally make his own judgment. However, Wu Shuang, this little fellow, has good taste. He's also very courageous. If you have time in the future, you can send him to my sect. I'll train him personally. The old man suddenly changed the topic and said. When the king heard this, he immediately cupped his hands and said, "Qian, thank you for your kindness, old Prime Minister." The old man waved his hand, looking nonchalant. Although Shan Wushuang had said this in the beginning, what he said was not an exaggeration at all. In this way, the God realm could be considered to owe Xiaoyang a huge favor. "Look, it's almost as I said." He stopped. After a long time, the strange phenomenon disappeared. The God Emperor pointed in the direction of the king's residence and laughed. Chapter 1841. Outside the cultivation room of the king's residence, a majestic man dressed in white was sitting outside. There was a teapot and a few teacups on the stone table. The tea leaves in the teapot were treasures of the God realm. A sip of it could quench one's thirst, and it had the effect of making up for one's cultivation base. However, the man did not seem to be interested in such a spiritual item at all. Instead, he looked expectantly at the fluctuating spiritual energy in the room. Although the natural phenomenon had ended, the spiritual energy inside was still surging like a tide. Clearly, this was a sign that he was about to break through again. Therefore, Unrivaled God wanted to see if this friend of his would break through to peak rank 9 in one go. This point really made people look forward to it. If he could really do it, then Xiaoyang might become a person second only to Princess Mingzhu. However, on second thought, Xiaoyang had already become one in the tomb of the god of sin. He had only been a rank 8 when he defeated Lei Dingtian and killed Han Fenglu. That was how he had achieved so much. Now that his level had skyrocketed, It was hard to fathom how terrifying his ability would be. It was even possible that his combat strength would be on par with the 4 godly generals. Unrivaled God's heart was surging like waves as he thought about this. He knew that this friend of his was definitely not a simple person. He had been sitting here for a few days now. However, he did not go into closed-door cultivation right away. Instead, he was waiting for news from Xiaoyang. He also wanted to know what kind of benefits he would get for winning this bet. Xiaoyang was a person who valued friendship very much. Unrivaled God had learned that in the tomb of the god of sin. He was happy about this, but at the same time he was unhappy. He was unhappy because he had always wanted to pull this person into the god realm. However, now it seemed that he valued friendship too much. How could he give up his original world? Therefore, Unrivaled God felt rather helpless now. Perhaps a lot of things were just wishful thinking on his part at the beginning. However, to be able to make such a friend seemed to be a very good gain. Inside the cultivation room, Xiaoyang suddenly let out a loud roar, blocking all the spirit qi that was madly pouring into his body, making it impossible for it to continue pouring in. After the spiritual qi lost its guidance, it immediately became like a headless fly and even began to riot. Fortunately, the array in the house was relatively good, so it was easily suppressed. Xiaoyang exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, his face glowing with vigor. After coming out of the tomb of the god of sin, Xiaoyang began to cultivate in seclusion. He combined the inheritance of Purifier Soken and the things he obtained in the tomb of the god of sin, so it was natural for him to make a breakthrough. This was what it meant to be well prepared. It was just that the eruption this time was even stronger. In fact, reaching the peak of the 9th stage was almost a matter of course. However, Xiaoyang didn't do that and gave up this opportunity to reach the heavens in a single bound. Although this step was very tempting, if the step was too big, sometimes there would be endless troubles. Therefore, Xiaoyang managed to get rid of all these distracting thoughts in a timely manner. In addition, because of his cultivation, every step had to be taken steadily. This time he broke through 2 realms consecutively. With his previous accumulation, it was indeed nothing. However, if he broke through a little more, he was afraid that he would face a situation where his cultivation would become superficial. It could be said that, to a large extent, he was able to maintain his valiant fighting strength because he had hammered almost every realm to the extreme. That was why he was so powerful. Immediately, Xiaoyang took a deep breath and began to look inside himself. In his body, there were 2 streams of spirit qi that were like small streams, circulating endlessly. It could be said that the reason why breaking through from the 8th stage to the 9th stage was a shackle for many people in the realm of the gods was very simple. In order to reach the 9th stage, it was necessary to condense the spirit qi into meridians. To do this was definitely not an easy thing to do. In the end, the 3 realms of the 9th stage were just the foundation for the next big realm. Every small realm would condense a spirit qi meridian. Finally, these spirit qi meridians would be combined. It was like turning 3 small streams into a big river. These all needed to be done step by step. Each person's fate was different. To condense a spirit qi meridian was originally not an easy thing to do. Moreover, to combine 3 spirit qi meridians was a huge problem. It wasn't something that ordinary people could do. However, there were some problems with Xiaoyang's spirit qi meridians. This was because spirit qi meridians were all of the same attribute. Therefore, when the time came for cultivation, it would be easy to combine them. However, Xiaoyang's first spirit qi meridian was a poison meridian formed by his own cultivation. Therefore, such a poison meridian was normal. However, the second spirit qi meridian wasn't a poison meridian. It was a lightning spirit qi meridian. In this way, it would not be easy to combine 2 spirit qi meridians with completely different attributes. Therefore, it was destined that it would be very difficult for Xiaoyang to break through to the next big realm. Therefore, This made Xiaoyang quite helpless. Two completely different attributes could indeed make his strength stronger. However, if he wanted to go further, the difficulty would also be higher. As for why the lightning meridian was condensed, Xiaoyang didn't find it strange. At the same time, he was very surprised. The effect of this lightning fruit was really extraordinary. It was somewhat unexpected. However, this didn't matter. Although the road was full of thorns, it was just an experience. Why should he think so much? However, the benefits obtained from this trip to the tomb of the god of sin were naturally not small. Although there was no obvious improvement, it was enough to increase Xiaoyang's strength by a lot. If he were to meet Han Fenglu again, then he wouldn't have to fight so hard. Of course, to him, even the threat of Lei Dingtian could be ignored. Even if Lei Dingtian's luck was not bad this time and his strength skyrocketed, as long as he didn't step into that realm, then Xiaoyang would still have the power to fight. Moreover, this battle would not be as difficult as before. Even after racking his brains and using all his skills, he could only achieve a draw. Then, Xiaoyang got up and walked outside. After staying in this room for so long, he couldn't help but feel a little depressed. The current him could be said to be in high spirits. Chapter 1842. As soon as he walked out of the cultivation room, Xiaoyang saw a man who looked mighty but had a hint of mockery in his eyes as he sat there drinking tea. He looked carefree and relaxed. You really have amazing willpower. Many people find it harder to break through a small level in rank 9 than to climb to the heavens. You're good, though. You've already kicked the door open, but you've taken it back, Unrivaled God said helplessly, feeling speechless. However, this was Xiaoyang. He had never played by the rules. No one knew what he was thinking. Sometimes it was normal to do things that did not conform to common sense. Xiaoyang did not stand on ceremony. He sat beside Unrivaled God and poured himself a cup of tea. The faster you walk, the harder you fall, Xiaoyang said with a grin as he moistened his throat. Unrivaled God nodded in agreement. At the same time, the way he looked at Xiaoyang changed slightly. Many people would do their best to grab hold of the slightest opportunity to improve themselves. As for the negative effects that would result from doing so, those were things for the future in their eyes. At least, they thought the drawbacks were less than the gains. However, sometimes it was the accumulation of insignificant drawbacks that destroyed their upper limits. Sometimes it was not a bad idea to take things slowly. However, Xiaoyang's foundation was very solid. Nobody would have thought that he could still suppress his cultivation like this. Every step he took was very steady. That was very admirable. Sometimes opportunities did not appear so easily. It was not an exaggeration to say that they did not come easily. This guy seemed to be very indifferent about all this. He even looked like he did not care about it at all. That made people feel a little helpless. That may be the case, but aren't you walking a little too cautiously? Unrivaled God's mouth twitched slightly as he said, subconsciously. Xiaoyang shook his head nonchalantly, saying, If I want to go further, I can't make any mistakes with every step. At least, I haven't set a goal for myself until now. As soon as he said that, Unrivaled God's expression turned extremely ugly. At the same time, the way he looked at Xiaoyang changed once again. In his heart, he knew very well that Xiaoyang's thoughts were probably about that realm as well. It was also because he had never thought about his own upper limit that every step he took was very steady, which made the future full of infinite possibilities. Although it was a little slow, it was not to be underestimated. Moreover, Xiaoyang's walking speed was not slow at all. Great accomplishment of the 9th stage was enough to make many geniuses sigh at their inadequacy. If he continued on like this, as long as he had enough martial arts, he might be able to go even further. This kind of mentality that had a long history was not something that ordinary people could control. When many people were young, it could be said that they were extremely ambitious. Therefore, on the path of cultivation, they also had the attitude of cutting off all means of retreat and advancing triumphantly. However, once too much time had passed, it was inevitable that there would be some deficiencies in the mentality. In the end, they would face difficulties in advancing even an inch. Your way of thinking is really a little too safe. It's just that there aren't so many logical things in this world, Unrivaled God said with a wry smile. Sometimes ideas were indeed very beautiful. No matter how one looked at it, it was a perfect and flawless existence. However, in reality, one would hit a wall everywhere. It would not be as smooth as one would expect. At the end of the day, the world was unpredictable, and the outcome was unpredictable. Xiao Yang, on the other hand, smiled because he had seen what the mountain peak looked like. Therefore, he knew very well what it was like. What he needed to do now was to look for loopholes and fill in the gaps so that he would not be greedy and advance rashly when the time came. By doing so, he would build a tighter foundation to ensure that he would not have any problems in the future. The further one wanted to go, the more it would be like building a skyscraper from the ground. However, if there were any problems with the foundation, the higher the building, the more dangerous it would be. I say, after you came out, you didn't seize the time to cultivate. Instead, you're here chatting with me. Aren't you afraid that you'll hold yourself back? Xiao Yang did not intend to continue on this topic and instead teased him with a smile. After all, many things were not so easy to distinguish between right and wrong. What's more, everyone's views were very different. Naturally, it was impossible to force others to do anything. It was really meaningless to argue with the other party about their own views of the world and want the other party to admit it. It would just be a waste of time and effort. Unrivaled God was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "You're occupying my spot. I can't go into closed-door cultivation even if I want to." He looked very wronged, but he also looked very shameless. "Go on," Xiao Yang said calmly. Unrivaled God glanced at him and realized that Xiao Yang was indeed not interested in continuing his breakthrough. He sighed and turned around to enter the cultivation room on his own. Such a great opportunity had actually been stopped by this guy. It was really exasperating. He did not know what to say. However, it was already good enough that he had achieved complete rank 9. As for other things, he would talk about it later. There was no need to worry too much. After watching Unrivaled God go in, Xiao Yang sipped his tea and began to ponder in his mind. He did a rough calculation and realized that he had been away from his hometown for at least 6 years. Now, it seemed that everything had come to a successful conclusion. It was time to go back and take a look. However, Unrivaled God had just gone into closed-door cultivation. He did not know when he would come out. This made him feel rather helpless. However, after receiving such a huge favor from the heavenly realm, the problem was how to repay it. That was why Xiao Yang did not leave immediately. How was he going to repay this favor? It was a headache for him. Although he could put all of this friendship on Unrivaled God, it seemed that no matter what he did at the moment, he could not help the heavenly realm. This was because most of the people here did not lack anything. Moreover, with his abilities, there was really nothing he could do. Therefore, Xiao Yang was hesitant. He did not know how to deal with this matter. A while later, an elegant and easygoing middle-aged man walked over slowly. When Xiao Yang saw the man, he immediately stood up and saluted with cupped fists. "Senior Dewang, what brings you here today?" Chapter 1843. Shen Qian looked at the junior in front of him. He hadn't been in seclusion for long, only 2 or 3 days, but he had already broken through 1 major realm and 1 minor realm. The speed was so fast that it was truly shocking. However, what made him the most suspicious was that his aura wasn't exposed at all. It was extraordinarily restrained. This was the most shocking aspect. What sort of self-control did one have to possess to be able to accomplish such a feat? Even a senior like him could only describe it as inconceivable in the end. Breaking through 2 realms consecutively wasn't much. There were precedents in the realm of the gods. However, to restrain it was the most difficult part. Therefore, Shen Qian was very surprised. Although this kid's strength had increased, There didn't seem to be any other changes in other areas. It was as if he had eaten a bowl of porridge. It was very simple and relaxed. "The God Emperor wants to see you," Shen Qian said. It could be said that after their meeting ended, Shen Qian returned to the residence to wait. Once Xiaoyang came out of seclusion, he would follow the God Emperor's orders and bring him to the palace. However, he felt that he could slack off during this period of time. He didn't expect that the kid would come out of seclusion right after he settled the matter. This was really unexpected. However, he didn't mind. After all, this kid revealed too many strange things. These words caused Xiaoyang to frown slightly. This really made him a little confused. He didn't know what was going on, because he didn't think that a small character like him could catch the God Emperor's attention. The last meeting was just to give the chief a good reward and also to take a look at him at the same time. Could it be that this time the God Emperor wanted to find out more about him? Now, Xiaoyang asked in surprise. Shen Qian smiled and nodded. "If you want to tidy up your appearance, it's fine. After all, time doesn't make a difference." Xiaoyang lowered his head to take a look. He was dressed appropriately and didn't lack manners. Then he set off with the king. As for dressing up, in Xiaoyang's opinion, there was no need for that. Sitting in the carriage, pulled by the dragon horse, Xiaoyang sat at the side and began to think. Why did the God Emperor summon him this time? Could it be to find out what happened in the tomb of the God of Sin? However, the details of the story had probably been explained clearly by him. Shen Qian looked at the young man in front of him and revealed a helpless smile. If he could recruit this young man into the king's residence, his strength would definitely increase greatly. Not to mention that Xiaoyang himself was already at the peak of the 9th stage. In the future, he would definitely reach the peak of the 9th stage. In fact, he could even fight for that realm. For example, the high-grade heavenly flame that he possessed could even burn Su Muhua to death. It could be seen how terrifying its power was. Unfortunately, he felt that he was very good at judging people and was good at making friends. If he wanted Lin Huang to serve the king's residence, he probably wouldn't have the chance. Although Xiaoyang appeared to be very easygoing right now, once he encountered something that he didn't like, he would probably show a very strong reaction in the end. If that happened, the friendship between him and unrivaled God might even collapse because of that. Senior King, I wonder why the God Emperor summoned me this time. Xiaoyang thought for a while and asked with a smile. Shen Qian was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled faintly and said, I'm not sure. Some things haven't been finalized, so I can't reveal anything to you. Xiaoyang's expression changed slightly as soon as he said that. What kind of things hadn't been finalized? Something that could make them hesitate was probably not a small matter no matter how he looked at it. Therefore, this made Xiaoyang's heart very nervous and uneasy. However, he was quite confident in the God realm's way of doing things. It could be said that everyone was strictly disciplined. Naturally, there wouldn't be any big trouble. Of course, there were some black sheep, and they existed everywhere. You don't have to worry too much. You just have to do some things according to your heart. Sometimes, if you think too much, you'll end up making wild guesses. Then there won't be much meaning, Shen Qian said calmly. At the same time, Shen Qian was also thinking about this matter. Logically speaking, given the relationship between Xiaoyang and his eldest son, Shen Wushuang, he could still say a few words on behalf of him. When the time came, he would naturally owe Shen Wushuang a favor if he succeeded. However, whether this was a success or failure, it would just give people a reason to criticize him. However, the difference in strength between success and failure was just a matter of strength. Shen Qian was also very clear that, as a person in the situation, his words would inevitably be overinterpreted by some people with ulterior motives. Therefore, this was also a point that made people feel helpless. Although the three kings' words had a lot of weight, it was inevitable that they would be forced into a situation where gossip was a fearful thing. At this moment, Xiaoyang also smiled faintly. Just as the king said, it was indeed meaningless for him to think too much now. After all, there were some things that he was afraid that no matter how much he speculated, it would just be a waste of effort. With that thought in mind, Xiaoyang closed his eyes to rest and stopped thinking about it. Since the matter had come to an end, then he would solve it. At the very least, what he felt from the god realm was kindness and not malice. Seeing this, Xin Qian smiled but didn't say anything. There were some things that were better left unsaid. This was because sometimes if one knew some of the reasons, it would inevitably backfire. Not long after, because the king was leading the way, their journey through the palace could be said to be smooth and unobstructed. At the same time, the way many people looked at Xiaoyang changed greatly. This was because after the news of what the Greenly realm had done in the tomb of the god of sin spread, many people were especially impressed with this person from the outside world who had broken the game. It could be said that during this period of time, Xiaoyang's reputation had also skyrocketed because of how he had broken the game in the tomb of the god of sin. In addition to the foreshadowing of being the champion previously, now he was really a hot topic and like the sun in the sky. Along the way, Xiaoyang felt a little helpless after feeling the gazes that were directed at him. The worship of the strong was the same no matter where it was. After walking through several palace doors and dozens of long corridors, Xiaoyang was led by Xin Qian to a quiet room. Chapter 1844. The layout of the quiet room was very simple. There was a rectangular table in the middle. It wasn't very big and was about 6 feet long. Beside the table, there were 3 chairs on the left and right. The middle-aged man who looked dignified sat casually on the chair. Although he sat casually, his aura was hard to ignore. It was so much so that even his casual seating seemed to have a natural aura, causing others to unconsciously feel reverence in their hearts. He was the master of the divine realm, the emperor god. The divine realm had a unique system. Many things were left to the people below. 3 kings for generals and a prime minister handled almost all the affairs. Therefore, the 8 of them had extraordinary reputations. The emperor god, on the other hand, had always lived in seclusion. However, no one in the divine realm dared to question or talk about him. There was no other reason. He was just the strongest. When the emperor god saw Xiaoyang arrive, he waved his hand and pointed to a seat. "Sit down and talk." The moment he finished speaking, the divine emperor started to pour tea. He looked as if he was receiving a guest and not showing mercy to a minor character. There were only the 2 of them in the quiet room. This caused waves to appear in Xiaoyang's heart once again. He could not help but start to mutter in his heart. The more casual a matter like this was, the more complicated it was. For a moment, Xiaoyang felt a huge pressure from the bottom of his heart. He had a feeling that today's events would exceed his expectations and control. This feeling could be said to be terrible. However, there was nothing he could do about it. After all, since things had already happened, it wasn't something that could be easily avoided. After seeing Xiaoyang take a seat, the emperor god pushed the teacup in front of him and poured himself a cup. "May I know why Senior has summoned me this time?" Xiaoyang asked straightforwardly. These words didn't seem like much. However, it was unavoidably disrespectful to the emperor god. Fortunately, there wasn't a third person here. Therefore, no one said anything to him. As for the god emperor, he was in a very good mood and had no intention of making a fuss over it. This was because, in the eyes of the divine emperor, this young man might become a powerful ally in the future. Therefore, speaking with a condescending attitude was not the way to treat an ally. In the eyes of the god emperor, there was no need to beat around the bush and flatter. This was the temperament of a youth. If she was too enthusiastic, then he wouldn't like her. "I'd like to invite you to join the god realm. As for the conditions, I've already stated them clearly. As long as she's a member of the royal family, just say the word. Even if she's my daughter, I'll give you 100 years. As long as you're worthy of her, that's fine too," the god emperor said straightforwardly. Since both of them were straightforward people, there was no need for them to hide anything. Sometimes it was better to be more direct so that there was no need to waste words. Instantly, Xiaoyang felt as if he had been struck by lightning. The God Emperor's words really had the momentum of not giving up until he shocked everyone to death. Moreover, these conditions were also very tempting. Previously, the God Emperor had said that if Xiaoyang really had the ability to become the next God Emperor, then it wasn't impossible. It could be said that as long as Xiaoyang nodded, then he would naturally enjoy great wealth and glory in the future. In fact, his status in the God realm would also rise with the tide and surpass the operations of many families for thousands of years. However, Xiaoyang wasn't that kind of person. He smiled calmly and said, "Please forgive me. I can't do that." Once he joined the God realm, then his connection with the drifting cloud realm would be severed. Compared to the God realm, the drifting cloud realm was practically in tatters. No matter how one looked at it, it was inferior to the God realm. However, Xiaoyang was a cultivator who was born and raised in the drifting cloud realm. Since he came from that place, then he naturally wouldn't deny or betray it. Since it was that place that raised him and built his foundation, then he could just turn around and do the same. He wouldn't do something as filthy as taking the milk as his mother's milk. The God Emperor's expression didn't change at all. It was as if everything was within his expectations. Of course, the God Emperor naturally had his own plans for this. Then do you know what the God realm wants to do? The God Emperor asked with a smile. These words made Xiaoyang frown slightly. Naturally, he had some guesses on the way here about what the God realm wanted to do. However, he was confused and didn't dare to be certain. Therefore, he didn't think too much about it. Moreover, there were some things that he had never seen before. Therefore, he naturally couldn't just make groundless accusations and kick himself in the foot. Seeing that Xiaoyang was deep in thought, the God Emperor continued, "Don't you think that although you're like a fish in water in the 3,000 worlds now, however, will there still be a day when it will limit you? If you join the God realm, you can go to an even bigger stage in the future. You can see a bigger world and stronger cultivators." When he said this, the God Emperor became more agitated. It could be said that he had spent hundreds of years planning this so that he could return one day. Moreover, Xiaoyang was already at the upper tier of the 9th level. If he wanted to, he could directly reach the peak. It was also possible for him to take another 100 years to settle down and reach his level. However, when that time came, there would be very few opponents in the 3,000 worlds. That would be very lonely, and it would be easier for him to be stagnant. Instantly, Xiaoyang's heart trembled. The thought that he thought was the most impossible appeared in his mind. As for what the God realm was plotting right now, it was enough to deduce too much from just a few words from the God Emperor. Looking at the dignified, middle-aged man in front of him, Xiaoyang's lips curled into a smile. The God Emperor had never been involved in anything all this time. It was probably because he was planning this. It was no wonder that the God realm had given some quotas to other stronger small worlds in the past few thousand years. It was probably because they wanted to select the right alliance. The God Emperor wasn't angry at being stared at like this. This was because he felt that this young man had already begun to feel the bigger world and wanted to soar, upgrading a small world to a medium world. The God Emperor is really generous. Xiaoyang took a deep breath and suppressed the agitation in his heart. The smile on his face also became wider. Chapter 1845. The Emperor God frowned slightly when he heard that. At the same time, the way he looked at Xiaoyang changed again. There was a look of shock in his eyes. The God Emperor had never told anyone about the world in the process of ascension. Those who knew about it were only the core members. There were even fewer people who knew about it. Moreover, it was just a premeditated plan. Although the preparations were almost done, it was still something that had not been finalized. However, how did Xiaoyang know about it so clearly? Could it be that his second brother told him? However, the Emperor God quickly denied that possibility. His second brother was very tight-lipped. He would definitely not tell a young fellow about it. Therefore, where did he get the information from? This was thought-provoking. This is nothing strange. The 3,000 cosmoses are everything in our small world. Above them are the 3,000 medium worlds and the 3,000 great worlds. Xiao Yang continued when he saw that the Emperor God's expression was not right. When these words came out, the God Emperor was even more shocked. At the same time, the way he looked at the young man changed again. How did this guy know so much? Moreover, it was only after he had succeeded as Emperor God that he found out about a lot of things. After he became the Emperor God and learned about everything, he began to plan for the middle worlds. At the same time, the Emperor God saw that part of history as a humiliation. They were so proud and arrogant, but they had fallen to such a state. This made him very unhappy. However, it was not easy to promote the middle worlds. He felt that it was too difficult to do it alone. Therefore, he needed allies. If I'm not wrong, the Tomb of the God is the battlefield where the God world fell from the 3,000 medium worlds to the small world. That place was probably a piece of land that belonged to the God world. However, it was sealed by an almighty back then. Therefore, it became the tomb of the God of sin today, Xiao Yang continued. The Emperor God was even more shocked. At the same time, he began to think quickly. Could it be that this guy had obtained some opportunity in the tomb of the God of sin? Was that why he knew about these things? Of course, this was also very possible. However, it was not a coincidence. Who knew how much time had passed since that incident? Previously, there was no news about it. Now, how could Xiao Yang know about it? Therefore, there were some suspicious points in this that he could not figure out. Seeing the Emperor God's shocked expression, Xiao Yang smiled indifferently. It could be considered a great achievement to be able to make this person, who is known as the strongest person in the 3,000 small worlds, so shocked. How do you know about these things? The Divine Emperor took a deep breath as his expression turned serious. Soon after, Xiao Yang continued, not only do I know these things, for example, why the spiritual energy in the God realm is so dense, I'm also very clear about that. The God Emperor was no longer as shocked as before. Instead, he was filled with anticipation. He wanted to know how much this little guy knew and how many surprises he could give him. I believed that the God realm was not bad in the middle worlds in the past. Until now, it was able to preserve 2 world spirit veins. The largest one was used to support the entire God realm, while the smallest was used to supply the God capital to forcefully nurture experts. Xiao Yang saw that the Emperor God was waiting for his answer, so he told him the truth. If a person wanted to break through King Wu's shackles, they would need to form world spirit veins. It was the same for the world. If a world was strong enough and had many experts nurturing it, it would also nurture world spirit veins that complemented the cultivators. Although there were many similarities between world spirit veins and cultivators' world spirit veins, the value they had was different. There were many types of world spirit veins. Among them, world spirit veins were the most precious. It was not an exaggeration to say that world spirit veins were the essence of a world. However, in the 3,000 small worlds, most of them were at King Wu's level. Therefore, it was difficult for them to nurture world spirit veins. However, the God realm was different. They already had world spirit veins, which was why it was so convenient. Among the 3,000 small worlds, the God realm was the only one. Only this place had world spirit veins. When the Emperor God heard this, he revealed a satisfied smile. This was because what this young man knew had exceeded his expectations. At the same time, he also felt that this young man was not as simple as he seemed. No matter how he looked at it, it was not easy to know this information. Now, the Emperor God could not help but wonder if Xiao Yang had come from the remote, drifting cloud world. Or could it be that there were still some secrets hidden in that place? The Emperor God was not prepared to think about these questions in detail. Sometimes, asking directly was the safest way. How did you find out about all this? Don't tell me that you obtained this information from some historical remains. The Emperor God's face turned serious as he said. Xiao Yang's brows furrowed slightly. There were some things that he naturally cannot say. After all, Sometimes when the truth was told, it would be too shocking. My master told me all this in the past. Therefore, I only vaguely remember some of it, Xiaoyang said after thinking for a while. It could be said that this was also the most reasonable explanation. Sometimes having a powerful master that did not exist was a great protective talisman. Master? The Emperor God asked doubtfully. If Xiaoyang's strength was already so powerful, then how terrifying would his master be? Emperor God, you don't have to think too much. When I was very young, my master had already ascended to the 3,000 small worlds after imparting his skills to me, Xiaoyang said. Once those words were said, the God Emperor also started laughing. This explanation seemed very reasonable, but there was something wrong with it. However, as for what was wrong, he could not pinpoint it. However, he was certain that this young man before him was definitely not ordinary. Perhaps there was still some possibility in his small world. He came from a small world, but was able to grow so quickly in such a short period of time. That illusory master of his was the best explanation. Actually, the tomb of the god of sin was not where the battlefield was. I learned from the ancient books that back then, our god realm made too many enemies. Therefore, we were attacked by a group. In the end, the emperor ancestor had no choice but to perish together with all the enemies. Therefore, that place was sealed. It was also because of this that our god realm suffered great losses and fell into this small world, the emperor god said and sighed helplessly. Chapter 1846. Hearing such an answer, Xiaoyang let out a bitter laugh, helplessly. Although it was very different from what he had guessed, the result was more or less the same. It was all because of the tomb of the god that the realm of the gods fell from one of the 3,000 medium worlds to a small world. After the fall of the emperor ancestor, the realm of the gods was suppressed and restricted by the other medium worlds. That was why they kept losing experts, and in the end, they became the last to be eliminated. Of course, there was another possibility, which was that the realm of the gods simply escaped into the 3,000 small worlds in the face of the suppression from countless enemies. This way, they could isolate themselves from all the attacks and gain themselves some peace. However, no matter what the possibility was, it was a fact that the realm of the gods fell from a medium world to a small world. Although they were no longer besieged and hunted down by their enemies, they had also lost the spiritual energy of the middle world. Therefore, the god realm, which was full of talents in the past, was no longer as full of talents as it used to be. Of course, that was only in comparison to the medium worlds. In the 3,000 small worlds, they were still an almost invincible existence. No one could shake the realm of the god's position. Faced with the emperor god's honesty, Xiaoyang could only let out a bitter laugh, helplessly. Since the god emperor had already revealed these matters, he had a rough idea of what was going on. However, it was still impossible for him to agree to join the realm of the gods as a springboard to enter the medium worlds. So, are you still not willing to join the realm of the gods? As long as you say it, even if you have to be second only to me, I can agree to it, the emperor god said very seriously. Since Xiaoyang had such a powerful master, his strength would definitely improve by leaps and bounds in the future. It was even possible for him to reach the same realm as the emperor god. Therefore, the emperor god could see clearly that verbal promises were nothing. After all, one day he would be able to achieve all of this with his own strength. Xiaoyang nodded firmly and said, I said before that I will not betray my world. The emperor god was speechless. How could this be considered betrayal? This kind of logic was indeed a little puzzling. Sometimes, a lot of people have different ideas. It could be said that, for countless years, many people wanted to join the divine realm. This made many people feel that it was their honor to be invited by the divine realm. Therefore, now that there was someone who they felt was abnormal, they felt that it didn't make sense. As for the middle world that Senior mentioned, you can go there first. When the time is right, it won't be too late for us to celebrate with wine, Xiaoyang said as he finished the cup of tea that the emperor god had poured for him. Although it would be difficult for Xiaoyang to drag the flowing cloud world into the 3,000 great worlds. However, it was still possible to send it to the middle world. What's more, what the flowing cloud realm lacked was not people with talent, but a spirit vein. As long as he had a spirit vein, he firmly believed that even if he couldn't catch up to the scale of the god realm one day, he would still be close to it. At that time, they would still have a foothold in the 3,000 middle worlds. Hearing this answer, the god emperor laughed. This young man was truly lofty and lofty. However, it wasn't an easy task to promote the 3,000 small worlds into a middle world. Ever since he ascended to the throne, he had been planning this. Until now, he had only seen a hint of it. Moreover, even with such ample preparation, the God Emperor was still inviting people with potential to join the God realm and head towards the middle world. Even so, he didn't dare to say that it was a sure thing. This matter isn't so simple, the God Emperor reminded. Xiaoyang nodded. He was naturally clear about this matter. However, he firmly believed that with his abilities and knowledge, it was still possible. With his current influence in the flowing cloud realm, it wouldn't be too big of a problem for him to form alliances. As for how to increase his strength, it wasn't impossible. Moreover, he still had the explosive pill that could forcefully increase a cultivator's realm. When the time came, it was still possible for him to refine more. In the face of the big picture, Xiaoyang wouldn't be stingy. Now, the God Emperor's mood had become somewhat gloomy. This brat's attitude was simply too resolute. Therefore, it seemed that this matter couldn't be discussed. As for the help that the God realm has given me, I won't forget it. When the time comes, if it's within my power, I'll definitely help, Xiaoyang said solemnly. Xiaoyang naturally wouldn't ignore this favor. However, he wouldn't abandon his own world because of this. If it was within his power, he would naturally do it. For example, he felt that he could change the flowing cloud realm with his own power and bring it into the 3,000 middle worlds. The God Emperor nodded. Sometimes such words could be taken seriously, but sometimes they couldn't be taken seriously. This was all based on the situation, so it wasn't right to make a decision. At the same time, the God Emperor also felt that he could still give the worst-case scenario a try. Previously, his heart was still beating like a drum. He didn't dare to make a decision on his own. So he called the 3 kings and the Prime Minister to discuss this matter together. However, the final result was obvious. That was why he personally invited Xiaoyang to join the God realm. It seemed that this time he had hit a wall in 2 places. This wasn't a good feeling. If an ordinary person dared to reject the God Emperor's invitation, he would just give them a slap. However, when it came to the young man in front of him, he didn't have such thoughts. After all, there weren't many young people with such talent and courage. Moreover, this person's knowledge wasn't shallow either. No matter who it was, everyone would respect someone with strength and confidence. Although he was the God Emperor, he also understood how important these people were. This was because their current realm and strength were indeed inferior to his. However, that was only because they were young. If they had cultivated for the same amount of time, what would happen? This generation's God Emperor wasn't as domineering as the previous generations. Instead, he was much gentler. However, the harvest wasn't small. Countless small worlds accepted him wholeheartedly. At the same time, their strength also increased greatly. Therefore, with the accumulation of time, the God realm also attracted the greatest number of people in the past tens of thousands of years. There wasn't only one person who could carry the banner, but several more. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave first. Xiaoyang put down his teacup, cupped his fists, and bowed at the God Emperor. Since they had already said so much, there was naturally nothing more to say between them. On the contrary, if he continued to stay, Xiaoyang would feel a little guilty. Chapter 1847. High-ranking people had always been temperamental. Perhaps it was because of the invitation that he had been so amiable. Now that he had been rejected, he might fly into a rage out of humiliation. Of course, given the Emperor God's self-restraint, this wouldn't happen. However, Xiaoyang couldn't help but think a little more. He might die if he made a mistake. Xiao Yang believed that no one in King Wu's realm could pose any threat to him. However, the Emperor God obviously didn't belong to King Wu's realm. A slap from him would be enough to make him unable to hide. It wouldn't be strange for him to die on the spot. The Emperor God took a deep breath as if he was suppressing the thoughts in his heart. His expression was ugly. How could he be happy after being rejected by a junior like this? However, he wouldn't vent his anger on Lin Fan. That wasn't the Emperor God's style. However, he still couldn't get over the anger in his heart. Therefore, it was normal for him to be unhappy. Xiao Yang's heart was pounding when he sensed the fluctuations in the aura of the Almighty in front of him. How could he not be afraid when facing the number one person in the divine realm? For a moment, the atmosphere in the quiet room began to change. Although it was very subtle, it also made one feel helpless. Xiao Yang also felt a little uncomfortable. Wasn't his attitude a little too casual when facing the Emperor God, who seemed to be very easy to talk to? Xiao Yang felt a little vexed when he thought of this. After a long time, the Emperor God took a deep breath and looked at the young man in front of him. He smiled faintly and said, "Since you don't want to join the divine realm, it doesn't mean that we can't be allies." In the Emperor God's opinion, the worst-case scenario was still worth a try. He didn't care what others thought of him, since he was the master of the divine realm. So what if he dictated today? He still had the ability to do so. Previously, he just had many concerns and wondered if it was worth it. However, after talking to Xiao Yang today, he felt that it was worth the gamble. Hearing this, Xiao Yang's brows furrowed slightly. At the same time, countless thoughts flashed through his mind. My original plan was to join forces with the Greenlee realm, the Sun Snow realm, and the Swordheart realm. Then I would find a powerful ally and work together to ascend to a medium realm, the Divine Emperor said slowly. Xiao Yang returned to his seat once again and continued to frown. Since the God Emperor had said so, the reason behind it was very simple. The last ally slot might be given to the Flowing Cloud realm because of him, coupled with the filthy things that the Greenlee realm had done in the Divine Mausoleum. They would probably lose their qualifications as well. Therefore, there was one more vacancy. My Flowing Cloud domain will most likely not be able to help. Rank 8 King Wu can be found everywhere in the God realm, but in my hometown it's extremely rare, Xiao Yang said helplessly, even though he was very envious of such an alliance. However, he still had a clear understanding of his own realm. If the Flowing Cloud realm were to ascend to a medium realm with its current strength, it would be difficult for it to survive even with a few powerful allies. Pulling the seedlings to help them grow would probably lead to them being uprooted when the time came. Hearing this, the God Emperor smiled faintly. Moreover, if I take up an ally slot alone, I'm afraid it'll be difficult to convince the others. Moreover, I can't represent the Flowing Cloud realm as a vassal to the God realm. Xiao Yang continued. Of course, this was also an excuse. If the Flowing Cloud realm took advantage of being a vassal, the cultivators of the Flowing Cloud realm would have to bow down to them. Therefore, it was difficult for him to accept such an outcome. This matter is indeed not simple. Therefore, it all depends on you. If you want to become our ally, you must at least have a martial emperor expert. The God Emperor's expression became very serious as he said. Hearing this, Xiao Yang fell into deep thought. If that was the case, then it made sense. Above King Wu's realm was the martial emperor realm. However, among the 3,000 small realms, cultivators who could reach the martial emperor realm were probably existences that could be counted on one's fingers. It could be said that this was the main event. With the presence of a martial emperor expert, the situation would change greatly. You don't have to worry. In the medium realm, martial emperors aren't everywhere. I think they're about the same as us. Most of them are at King Wu's realm, the God Emperor said calmly. Of course, this guess was not without proof. This was because the God realm had 2 spiritual veins. Even so, it could be said that there was a strong basis for this. This was also the reason why the God Emperor said that Xiaoyang could form an alliance with him once he became a martial emperor expert. We've temporarily decided to carry out this matter after 60 years. There's a high possibility that it will be brought forward. Therefore, as long as you can reach the martial emperor realm within this period of time, you'll have the right to become our ally. As for me, I can also convince the other 2 small realms to accept this decision, the God Emperor said. Xiaoyang nodded solemnly without any hesitation. He knew that the martial emperor realm was a step up. If he could form an alliance with the God realm and the Sword Heart realm to become a medium realm, then with the relationship between them, he wouldn't be so empty when he went out to travel and no one would be able to take care of him. Forming an alliance was a matter of mutual benefit. Therefore, as long as the decision could be made, it would be fine. As for how to push the drifting cloud realm to the God realm, although it was an extremely huge project, Xiaoyang still had a way to do it. Since that's the case, it's a deal, the God Emperor said as he poured a cup of tea into the empty teacup with a smile. Of course, their agreement was only the beginning. It would only officially begin when Xiaoyang reached the martial emperor realm. Therefore, the key to the success of this alliance was still in Xiaoyang's hands. Thank you for your kindness, Senior. Xiaoyang smiled, picked up the teacup, and drank it in one gulp. The God Emperor did the same. The 2 of them seemed to be using tea as wine to celebrate the success of their alliance. The God Emperor had already gone to this extent. If Xiaoyang still didn't agree, then he really didn't know what was good for him. However, an alliance of equal status made Xiaoyang feel very comfortable, as if he was bathing in the spring breeze. Therefore, he felt that when the time came to have such an ally, it would definitely be a very comfortable thing. As for when this alliance would be realized, that was a matter for the future. Chapter 1848. In a courtyard, an ordinary-looking man was sitting on a rattan chair. He was swaying back and forth in a leisurely manner. There was an indescribable sense of leisure about him. The man held a jade token in his hand. He kept rubbing it with his fingers, feeling the patterns and abundant spiritual energy on it. He felt very comfortable. However, there was a hint of worry and heaviness between his brows. This jade token was given to him by the God Emperor. It was called the Pisces token, and there was only one of its kind in the God realm. The holder of this token could travel freely in the God realm. Of course, there were some special places that couldn't be visited, but most places could. For example, one could enter and leave the palace at will. Of course, this was also a convenience that the God Emperor gave to Xiaoyang so that he could find him at any time. Of course, this Pisces token had many other uses, and there was no end to it. The agreement between him and the God Emperor had been reached. Therefore, Xiaoyang got one of the Pisces tokens. As for the other one, it was in the hands of the God Emperor. Looking at the lifelike fish on the jade token, Xiaoyang's lips curled into a bitter smile. Since he had chosen to ally with the God realm, the only thing left was for him to become a martial emperor. At the same time, he represented the drifting cloud realm, the small world that he belonged to. It could be said that once he became a martial emperor, he would have to shoulder the heavy responsibility of the drifting cloud realm. When he really went to the middle world, he would have to protect it. Therefore, when that time came, there would be many things that he had to worry about. That was also a responsibility. Of course, he couldn't regret it. Since there was a chance to ride the wind, there was bound to be some danger. There might even be the possibility of pulling the seedlings to help them grow. Therefore, Xiaoyang had to put in more effort to change this situation. If the overall strength of the drifting cloud realm couldn't be increased, no matter how high Xiaoyang's achievements were, he wouldn't be able to shoulder it by himself. Back then, the God realm was so powerful that it was probably one of the strongest in the middle world. However, because it was too overbearing, it made too many enemies. In the end, its vitality was greatly damaged, and it could only fall from the middle world to the small world. Looking at the spiritual energy fluctuating continuously in the cultivation room, it was clear that unrivaled God had seized his opportunity and was beginning to break through as well. Xiaoyang had been able to overcome obstacles all the way from King Wu rank 8 to full achievement rank 9. It was even more logical for Unrivaled God, who had just achieved full achievement rank 9, to do the same. However, no one knew how long this closed-door training would last. Therefore, Xiaoyang waited here. Although he wanted to return to the Flowing Cloud Realm as soon as possible and discuss the matter of forming an alliance with the God Realm with the various sects and powers, he had been away for too long and needed to return to take a good look. However, he felt that, as a friend, he should bid farewell to Unrivaled God. He didn't know how long he would have to wait, but Xiaoyang wasn't anxious at all. This was because he felt that waiting for a few more days and absorbing more spiritual energy would not be a bad thing. After all, the spiritual energy in the God Realm was very rich. It was unique. Xiaoyang yawned, appearing to be bored to death. Therefore, he simply activated the mental cultivation method he had obtained in the tomb of the God of Sin and began cultivating. This mental cultivation method was called the Spirit Hastening Source Fusion Technique. It could greatly increase the speed of cultivation. After a few days and nights, Xiaoyang got up helplessly. For a rank 9 cultivator like King Wu, the duration of a closed-door training to break through could be long or short. It all depended on one's luck. Sometimes one might feel that a breakthrough was imminent, but it was just a little bit away. That little bit might take a very long time to fill in. After all, Xiaoyang couldn't possibly wait forever. Perhaps Unrivaled God's closed-door training this time would be like the previous one. It might even take a few years. Therefore, he couldn't possibly wait for such a long time alone. However, Xiaoyang was very patient. Therefore, he was willing to wait for a few more days. If there was still no news from Unrivaled God of Sin after waiting any longer, he might have to leave without saying goodbye. After a few more days, Yang Sun came to the courtyard and sat on a stone bench. Yang Sun looked at the fellow Taoist in front of him, and a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Thinking back, when they first met, it could be said that they were evenly matched and shared the limelight. However, after a few years, the gap between them had grown wider and wider. It was as if all of this had happened inadvertently. This made one feel quite helpless. Congratulations! I didn't expect you to have broken through to rank 9. From now on, your words carry weight in the God Realm. You don't have to continue living under the shadow of the 3 words to King Residence, Xiaoyang said with a grin. Yang Sun smiled and nodded. This was how it was in the God Realm. Although he was still a top-ranking figure on the Hidden Dragon roll, the God Realm was filled with rank 8 powerhouses. For him to be able to stand out, a large part of it had to do with the 3 words to King Residence. Furthermore, in the God Realm, a person's identity was also very important. Even if you were not a powerhouse of King Wu Realm, as long as your identity was honorable enough, even a rank 8 powerhouse like King Wu would have to lower his head in front of you. Only after breaking through to rank 9 could one be considered to have stood out from the masses. Therefore, when Yang Sun went out to adventure in the future, the number of times others mentioned the King Residence would naturally be lesser. Of course, there was still some connection, but there was a change. In the past, it was the King Residence who protected him, but whether his actions in the future would bring honor or shame to them, he had the choice. Still can't compare to Brother Xiao, reaching major success in one step. I even heard that you had the chance to enter the pinnacle, but gave it up, Yang Sun said with a smile. When Xiaoyang heard that, he said indifferently, Among you all, you're the most straightforward and honest. But this isn't a bad thing either. Sometimes walk a little slower and lay down the foundation a little more firmly. Only then will the road in the future be easier to walk. In the future, if you have such an opportunity, you have to reflect on yourself more. Don't walk flightily. The strong were revered. Facing Xiaoyang's preaching, Yang Sun also accepted it calmly. But thinking about how this guy actually gave up such a great lucky chance, he still felt some regret in his heart. If Xiaoyang was really a little bolder this time and broke through to the pinnacle, then his identity and status would likely be different once more. However, Xiaoyang was still the same Xiaoyang. He was not blinded by the benefits in front of him. Chapter 1849. One needed to be rational on the path of cultivation. However, there were times when one needed to be impulsive, and there might even be some unexpected gains. However, there were pros and cons between the two. It all depended on how the person involved chose. Therefore, Yang Sun still felt that it was a pity. If Xiaoyang had been impulsive, he might have had more confidence. However, what was done could not be undone. Therefore, he could only feel regret. It was impossible to change what was already a foregone conclusion. Soon after, Yang Sun's gaze landed on the Pisces token as well. His eyebrows trembled slightly. The convenience of being able to obtain this jade token was unimaginable. From this, one could imagine how high Xiaoyang's position in the Emperor God's heart was. Yang Sun also helplessly laughed bitterly. It had only been a few years, but the gap between them had already become so big. It was really difficult for one to accept. At the same time, he also thought of another terrifying possibility. If Xiaoyang had been born in the realm of the gods, how fast would he have been able to level up? What realm would he be in now? The more he thought about it, the more surprised Yang Sun was. Now he had to admit that he was still inferior to Xiaoyang. Even if he was lucky enough to reach the 9th level of Kingwu, he still could not be compared to him. Thinking of this, he felt very uncomfortable. All along, Yang Sun felt that among the 3,000 worlds, only the cultivators of the god realm had the highest aptitude. However, now that he thought about it, it was only because of the uniqueness of the god realm that caused them to have such an illusion. Xiaoyang saw that Yang Sun's mood had become much lower and did not say anything else. Sometimes, when a person's heart had some problems, he still needed to sort them out himself. Yang Sun sat there for a long time and then left. At the same time, Yang Sun felt helpless. Because he came out of seclusion a day later, he could not join the army of the god realm to suppress the Greenly realm. It was such a great opportunity to gain experience, but it just passed by him. Xiaoyang was still lying on the rattan chair, slowly rocking back and forth with a lazy look. However, he did not slack off or fall behind in his cultivation. As time passed, the waves that were created in the god realm gradually calmed down. However, as more and more important news continued to spread, it created layers of ripples once again. Lei Dingtian came out of the tomb of the gods and immediately went into seclusion. From the mouths of the core members, there were also some shocking news. Right now, Lei Dingtian was already a peak rank 9 expert in the bag. In fact, he might even reach the martial emperor realm during this closed-door training. When this news spread, all the major forces in the divine realm were shocked. However, Lei Dingtian had already been recruited by the royal family. Therefore, it was impossible to make him one of their own to increase their influence in the realm of the gods. However, they knew very well that Lei Dingtian's entry into the god realm was already set in stone. As for the realm of the gods, there might be an additional martial emperor realm expert. On this day, Bai Jian came to the Wang mansion and told Xiaoyang the news. After hearing these words, Xiaoyang did not show any signs of worry. His body was still rocking along with the rattan chair, like a child, enjoying the endless joy of it. Bai Jian, who was standing at the side, saw that this guy did not seem to care at all and suddenly felt a little unhappy. He felt that this guy was a little too calm. Although he, Bai Jian, was only at the upper tier of Tier 9, he had the Sword Heart world behind him. If Lei Dingtian was really not at the martial emperor realm, there would naturally be people from the Sword Heart world behind him to protect his safety. However, there was no such powerful person in the drifting cloud world behind Xiaoyang. It could be said that Xiaoyang was the strongest person in the drifting cloud world. Without his protection, how could he fight against Lei Dingtian, who had already entered the martial emperor realm? Although Xiaoyang's previous battle record was very impressive, even when facing Lei Dingtian, he would not be outdone. However, the Kingwu realm and the Martial Emperor realm were two completely different concepts. The difference between the small realms was already very terrifying, and the difference between the big realms was like the difference between heaven and earth. Xiaoyang opened his eyes slightly. When he saw Bai Jian's worried look, he smiled faintly. Seeing that this fellow was still able to laugh under such circumstances, Bai Jian was truly helpless. Could it be that this fellow's self-confidence had reached such a level? This, I'm afraid, is a little hopeless. Princess Mingzhu is known as the top talent in the 3,000 worlds. How long has she been at the peak of Tier 9? Xiaoyang smiled faintly. Hearing this, Bai Jian's brows furrowed slightly. He naturally knew that Princess Mingzhu was very talented and could be said to have improved by leaps and bounds. She broke through to Tier 9 of Kingwu without any difficulty. However, in the 3 small realms of Tier 9, her progress was very slow. Thinking of this, Bai Jian felt much better in his heart. Lei Dingtian was indeed qualified to break through to the Martial Emperor realm. However, it was unknown how long he would need to do so. Therefore, as long as Xiaoyang could also improve his own strength during the period when Lei Dingtian was breaking through, then there was no need to worry. However, Xiaoyang was only at the upper tier of Tier 9, but his progress was still a little slow. Therefore, we don't have to worry at all during this period. Moreover, this will only happen a few decades later. Why should we worry about it now? Xiaoyang said with a smile. Bai Jian nodded. Although this was what he said, they still had to make some preparations. If they were not prepared, the end result would be very cruel. At that time, it was not something that anyone would want to see. Bai Jian shook his head helplessly and said, "You looking at how relaxed you are. I'm sure you know what's going on. However, we still have to plan for the worst, in case we don't even have a chance to escape." After all, their opponent was Lei Dingtian. They were top geniuses, but so was Lei Dingtian. Therefore, sometimes, once there was a gap in the realms, it would be difficult to match up. Chapter 1850. Seeing that Xiaoyang was so calm and did not panic, Bai Jian felt helpless. This made Bai Jian feel extremely helpless. Since Yi Shiwen was so indifferent, there was no need for him to continue wasting his breath. After all, sometimes it was almost impossible to change a person's mind once they had decided on something. Of course, it was indeed as Xiaoyang had said. Although Lei Dingtian might be breaking through to the Martial Emperor realm, it would take a long time for him to reach that realm. Therefore, there was no need to rush during this period of time. However, he needed to make some plans for that time. Xiaoyang was still rocking the rattan chair. He seemed to be a little tired and even yawned. Bai Jian looked at him. Although there were countless helplessness in his heart, there was nothing he could do. However, he was sure of one thing. If he could step into the Martial Emperor realm at the same time as Lei Dingtian, then he could help Xiaoyang avoid such a disaster. Back then, in the Thousand Thunder realm, if it was not for Xiaoyang, Bai Jian would have been defeated by Lei Dingyin. Naturally, he would not neglect such a friend who had gone through life and death. At the same time, he knew very well what he should do. In 2 days, I will be returning to the Sword Heart world. If you are free, come over and have fun. As long as you mention my name, I can guarantee that you will be able to go there without any hindrance. Bai Jian's expression became lighter at this time. He was not as serious as before. Of course, Bai Jian also knew that with Xiaoyang's current strength, as long as those old guys did not interfere in the Sword Heart world, he could still do whatever he wanted with his own strength. Xiaoyang nodded slightly and said, "If there is a chance, I will." The realm of the gods' grand competition had already ended, and the trip to the tomb of the god of sin had also ended. After leaving the tomb of the god of sin and consolidating what he had learned, he returned to his own pocket dimension. Moreover, for outsiders, most of them were not used to the realm of the gods. This was because there were too many rules here. Those who were used to wandering around would not have a good experience here. However, it had to be said that this place was still a holy land for cultivation, a place that was hard to come by. Soon after, the the two of them pretended to chat for a while. What they said was nothing more than some irrelevant words. Right now, Bai Jian was also a little sad because he did not know if he would still be able to drink with this friend of his who had gone through life and death together in a few decades. The affairs of the world were impermanent and the vicissitudes of life were ever-changing. Bai Jian also found out about some things. Moreover, it was also a general trend that was difficult to go against. However, it was not appropriate for him to speak about it. Therefore, he could only keep it in his heart. Before long, Bai Jian left. On the other hand, Yang Sun would occasionally come here. Firstly, it was to see how his brother's closed-door cultivation was going. Secondly, she wanted to talk to Xiaoyang so that he wouldn't be too bored in the Danwu. For Xiaoyang, such days were indeed very leisurely. At the same time, this also made people feel very comfortable. Shan Wushuang seemed to have encountered some difficulties. Therefore, in these 10 days, the fluctuations coming from the cultivation room were still fluctuating. Fortunately, it didn't cause too much trouble. Clearly, there were some problems with his state of mind. In addition, there were some areas that he hadn't been able to perfect. Therefore, such a situation occurred. He couldn't find that trace of opportunity and breakthrough. After the ripples caused by Lei Dingtian gradually faded away, Luo Rong of the Sun Snow Realm also left the tomb of the god of sin. However, Luo Rong was very disheveled after leaving the tomb of the god of sin. His entire body was surrounded by the aura of death. Fortunately, he protected his heart at the last moment and resolutely left the tomb of the god of sin. Therefore, he did not become a tomb keeper. De Wangfu had to personally remove the aura of death for him. That was how he managed to preserve his foundation. Although Luo Rong did not have the so-called domineering aura when he came out, he still chose to go into closed-door cultivation. It could be said that the realm of the gods was a holy land for cultivation. Because of the 2 spirit veins, this was the most suitable place. Although Luo Rong was disheveled, he also gained a lot. It was just that he did not show it and kept a low profile. Of course, this was different for everyone. It was also related to the cultivation method that each person cultivated. Therefore, when Lei Dingtian came out of the tomb of the god of sin, he caused quite a stir. On the other hand, Luo Rong was much quieter. As for what kind of advancement Luo Rong would get, many people were discussing and had different opinions. However, many people felt that at least the peak of the 9th rank was in the bag. It could be said that most of the cultivators who came out of the tomb of the god of sin had advanced by 1 level. Therefore, no matter what happened during this great year, it was acceptable. Previously, with the help of the god of Perplexity Pearl, the first person on the Hidden Dragon list also broke through to the 9th rank. Then, Jiang Feiyun and Yang Sun followed closely behind. It could be said that this trip to the tomb of the god of sin had created many experts. Luo Rong's talent was not bad. There was no reason that he could not advance by 1 level. At the same time, many people began to speculate. As the most talented person in the 3,000 worlds, Princess Mingzhu was already at the peak of the 9th rank before she entered the tomb of the god of sin. Now, according to the calculation of advancing by 1 level, would she directly enter the martial emperor realm? This point also caused one's imagination to run wild. However, most people felt that Princess Mingzhu would not let them down. However, during this time, there was still no news of Princess Mingzhu. Immediately, many people began to worry. If Princess Mingzhu's obsession was too deep because of her cultivation, if she really lost herself and became a tomb keeper, how terrifying would that be? Some people had such thoughts in their hearts, but they didn't dare to admit such a reality. After all, the reality was too cruel. Xiaoyang also did not hear any news of Ziying. He could not help but start to worry. Ziying had always been lively, naive, and romantic. However, she was also inexperienced and did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Could it be that she was so playful that she forgot the time and did not come out of the tomb of the god of sin? However, the tomb of the god of sin would open 1,000 years later. It was harder to find out what was going on with Ziying now. This made Xiaoyang feel very helpless. This was because he had not heard any news of Ziying from anyone in the tomb of the god of sin. Chapter 1851. He didn't know where Ziying was and what kind of situation she was in. This made Xiaoyang a little worried. However, everyone had their own destiny. There were things beyond one's reach that one could not take care of. He did not even know what was going on right now. Regarding this, Xiaoyang could only give it some thought. After all, his cultivation base was still far from Deking's. Moreover, Deking was more familiar with the tomb of the god of sin. If something really happened, King De would definitely not be able to sit still. Of course, it could also be said that Ziying was just having fun. After staying for a few more days, there was still no news from Shen Wushuang. Therefore, Xiaoyang left Fairy's capital after bidding farewell to Deking. He was prepared to discuss the alliance with the god of sin in the flowing cloud realm with the Almighties in the central world. This matter could not be delayed. After all, Xiaoyang still had to rack his brains on how to improve the overall strength of the flowing cloud realm. After leaving Fairy's capital, Xiaoyang began to drive the dilapidated flying ship out of the god of sin. Although the flying ship was severely damaged in the battle with Lei Dingtian, it could still be used. The dilapidated flying ship flew quickly in the sky above the god of sin. Although flying was not allowed in Fairy's capital, it was still possible to fly outside Fairy's capital without going to any city. Because of the large competition and the fact that the flying ship was made by Princess Mingzhu, everyone knew that it was a guest who was returning. Therefore, no one stopped or questioned it. Xiaoyang couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh when he thought about how an official's son tried to seize his airship when he passed by a city. Some people did not have the ability to do that, but they wanted to do something unscrupulous. It was really ridiculous. That castellan was also sued by Yang Sun for abusing his power. In the end, he could not even keep his position as castellan. Now, that person was very regretful. How could he have offended such a person? Especially when he found out that the person from the outside world whom he had intercepted back then had become the champion of the large competition in one fell swoop. He was filled with regret. However, that was just a small interlude in the end. Now that he thought about it, it was quite interesting. Even though the god realm was so clear and bright, it was inevitable that some parasites would appear from time to time. Half a month later, Xiaoyang arrived at the border of the god realm. Because of the Pisces token, he was able to pass through unimpeded. The way the people at the border looked at Xiaoyang had changed drastically once again. It could be said that only a small number of people recognized the Pisces token. However, those who knew about it knew what that title plate represented. After leaving the god realm, he felt that the surrounding spirit chi was so thin, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of disparity. It was as if he had fallen from the heavens to hell, especially when he had just come out from the god realm. The contrast was so great that Xiaoyang couldn't help but feel a great sense of disparity in his heart. Compared to the god realm, the spirit chi of the outside world could be described as extremely thin. Regarding this, Xiaoyang was also very helpless, who asked the god realm to have 2 spirit veins. If the flowing cloud world could have 1 spirit vein, then the overall strength of the flowing cloud world could be raised in a short period of time. However, to obtain a spirit vein of the flowing cloud world wasn't an easy thing to do. Therefore, this idea could only be kept in his heart for the time being, and he couldn't put it into action. Of course, Xiaoyang was also thinking about this matter. If he succeeded, then he would definitely benefit greatly. Immortal's capital, in a large hall of the palace, there was a huge mirror on the wall that was emitting a bright light. There was an old man standing in front of the mirror, but it couldn't reflect his image. The old man stroked the mirror, and the smile at the corner of his mouth was very strange. In the depths of the old man, there was a vermilion table with benches placed neatly on both sides. Prime Minister Jiang Zhangqing was at the side serving tea and seemed to be very attentive. As a figure below the emperor, he was doing such miscellaneous things. However, He didn't feel uncomfortable at all. Instead, he was very familiar with it and was very happy. This was because the person he was serving was the emperor god, King Da. The god emperor sat there and looked at the mirror. His brows furrowed slightly, but soon after he relaxed. At the same time, there was a faint trace of anger between his brows. Clearly, he was very unhappy with the situation today. As for King Da, he had a helpless look on his face. After all, there were some things that they couldn't say with certainty. The forces in the god realm were intertwined and couldn't be explained clearly. Even though the emperor god was the master of the god realm, he couldn't do as he pleased. In the face of important matters, he still needed to seek the consent of some people before he could carry it out. If it didn't work, then there would be more to say. The emperor god made the decision alone, and this decision made some people unhappy. Therefore, today's situation was set up. King Da didn't dare to speak rashly. He naturally supported his big brother in his heart. However, he couldn't say it out loud. Otherwise, these old fellows would have an excuse to make arbitrary decisions. For generations, the royal family was also kept in check. The royal family and the other families maintained a very delicate balance. However, when it came to the current emperor god's generation, there was a change. Putting aside the fact that this god emperor represented the strongest, the three kings following closely behind him had already caused the balance to tilt greatly. Also, because of the three kings' appearance, they couldn't maintain the balance in terms of power. Although their descendants couldn't compare to the emperor and the three kings, Princess Mingzhu, who came out of nowhere, was enough to make countless young people blush with shame. Shen Wushuang, who came later, was also a talent that could catch up to the three kings in the eyes of many. Shen Wushuang, who was first on the hidden dragon leaderboard, was also very likely to inherit the mantle of his father, King Shao. In addition, because of this new year, many people in the royal family received a lot of favors. Therefore, the most outstanding person in the other families was only Jiang Feiyun. It could be said that in the next few thousand years, the royal family would be the dominant family in the god realm. It would be difficult to maintain the balance. Even now, the emperor god was still making arbitrary decisions. Therefore, the old man felt that this was too overbearing. Therefore, it was only right that there should be checks and balances. Chapter 1852. Jiang Zhongqing, on the other hand, was doing what he was supposed to do. As for what would happen today, he just didn't want to talk about it. On one side was the emperor and the king, and on the other side was his respected teacher. No matter which side he stood on, he would inevitably offend others. Therefore, Jiang Zhongqing respected King Da very much. It was no wonder that he was worthy of such a title. Under such circumstances, he also kept his mouth shut and listened quietly to their opinions. Because King Qin and King Zhao were on an expedition to the Greenly Realm, only the God Emperor and this old man were at odds with each other. In the old man's eyes, the God Emperor's arbitrary decision was to strengthen the royal family's confidence. When the time comes, if they were too powerful, all the benefits would be taken by the royal family. What would they do then? Putting that aside, he felt that this ally was extremely unreliable. He wouldn't be able to help the God realm at all. In fact, he might even become a burden in the end. What was the point of doing such an arduous and thankless task? No matter how much you favor that outsider, it wasn't the first time you took such a huge risk. Therefore, the old man wanted to use this situation to tell the God Emperor that he didn't have the right to be an ally of the God realm. Soon after, the old man waved his hand and the huge mirror rippled like the surface of the water. It looked very magical. Soon, a vast starry sky appeared on the surface of the mirror. In the starry sky, there was a tattered flying ship that was flying rapidly. On the bow of the ship, a young man was lying there, resting with his eyes closed. He looked very relaxed. When he saw the young man, a trace of anger flashed across the old man's eyes. However, when he saw the Pisces medallion, he was instantly enraged. Naturally, he had heard the news before. The current leader had received the God Emperor's favor and was given the Pisces medallion, allowing him to move freely in the palace. God Emperor, you're really generous. You gave away the Pisces medallion, just like that. The old man snorted and said unhappily. The God Emperor smiled faintly. His expression was unreadable as his gaze landed on the young man. On the other hand, Prince De was looking down at the ground. When he saw the Prime Minister handing him a cup of tea, he didn't hold back and started drinking. Seeing that the God Emperor was ignoring him, the old man didn't get angry. He just vented his anger on that outsider. Everything could be said to have started because of him. I wonder why the old Prime Minister has called me here today. Or do you want me to take a good look at this brat? Is he lazy in his cultivation and lazy in his sleep? The God Emperor said nonchalantly. His words caused the old man's eyebrows to twitch slightly. He looked at the God Emperor who had been overseeing the God realm for many years. Now he was starting to look a little like a rascal when he was young. Zhangqing sighed helplessly in his heart. He really didn't know what to say to this old man. There were indeed too many problems. Sometimes it was not a good thing to stick to the rules. There were some words that Zhangqing didn't dare to say out loud. Although he was now the Prime Minister of the God Realm, he was still recommended by this old man. If they angered him, they would most likely be punished. Suddenly, the young man in the mirror opened his eyes and glanced at the mirror. The corners of the God Emperor's mouth curled into a satisfied smile when he saw this. He knew that Xiaoyang had also noticed that someone was spying on them. However, this scene made the old man very unhappy. He looked at the God Emperor with some doubt. How could this outsider detect such a mysterious method? It must be because of the Pisces token. At this moment, Xiaoyang immediately made a hand seal. Immediately, a ball of fire burned up, burning the mirror red. It was almost impossible to see what was going on inside. After seeing this scene, the old man clenched his fists. This guy was really too presumptuous. Zhangqing, who was standing by the side, was a little surprised. This chief's methods were really impressive. Not only could he find clues, but he could also break the situation. At this moment, the God Emperor laughed heartily. Then he took out the other half of the Pisces token and made a hand seal. He said in a low voice, "Stop the magic. Let this old man take a good look. Let him know that the ally I chose is not bad." In an instant, the fiery red color faded away at an extremely fast speed. Soon, the true appearance of the mirror could be seen. You can also feel that when I use the Pisces token, there will be spiritual energy guiding it. I didn't do it under your nose. The God Emperor said with a smile. The old man's expression was very bad. He looked at the young man with a different expression. This was something that no one had expected. After Xiaoyang discovered that he was being spied on, he didn't stop moving forward. Instead, he continued moving forward as if nothing had happened. It's just a perverted trick. What's the big deal? The old man snorted and said disdainfully. The God Emperor smiled indifferently and didn't care. The king thought for a moment and sighed. Old mister, times have changed. The old man suddenly glared at the king. He couldn't be disrespectful to the God Emperor, but he didn't care about the king. Zhangqing frowned at this moment, because he also felt that the king seemed to be unable to hold himself back. Of course, as long as he spoke up for the God Emperor would help to solve the problem. You keep saying that it's for the God realm, but have you thought about it? If Big Brother hadn't planned for hundreds of years to achieve today's situation, I'm afraid you wouldn't even dare to think about it. So he needs your approval to choose an ally? The king snorted coldly. The old man narrowed his eyes and looked at the king. Zhangqing's heart trembled because he knew that this was a sign that the old man was angry. The king turned a blind eye and said, "Why? Do you think that because my eldest son brought Xiaoyang here I'm shielding him? Ha! I believe that he has this ability. Besides, there are conditions for forming an alliance. If he can do it, we'll just have one more ally. If he can't do it, what loss does it have to us?" Zhangqing remained silent and just listened quietly. Or do you think that our imperial family's influence has been growing over the past 1,000 years and has hurt your interests? So you want to use this to beat us? the king said coldly. Immediately, the old man's frown deepened. The king had an unforgiving look and said, "What we want to do is to restore the god realm's former glory, but you want to keep us in check." Chapter 1853. Xiao Yang steered the flying ship through the vast starry sky. He looked at the Pisces token in his hand, and a vicious look flashed across his eyes. If the Emperor God had not asked him to withdraw his ability, he would have used Xiao Hua to continue concealing himself. However, the feeling of being spied on was indeed very uncomfortable. Although the Emperor God had told him that there were conditions for this alliance, and that it was only a verbal alliance, there would still be some resistance. However, he did not expect it to come so quickly. He had just left the God realm and someone had already started spying on him. Since the Emperor God was watching, Xiao Yang naturally did not need to worry about anything, because with him around, they would not go overboard. However, it definitely wouldn't be that simple. Therefore, this made Xiao Yang feel very uncomfortable in his heart. This feeling could be said to be very terrible. It was hard to imagine that there would be such a huge resistance before it could even become a reality. If there were no conditions, who knew what kind of crazy situation they would face? Standing at the bow of the ship, Xiao Yang was already paying attention to the changes in his surroundings. This was because he knew that it was not as simple as spying on him. It was also hard to say what kind of predicament there would be later on. All of this was due to the fact that he was not strong enough. Therefore, many people were worried. It could be said that this was a test to see if Xiao Yang was qualified to form an alliance with them. Xiao Yang was also well aware of this. The main reason was that the overall strength of the drifting cloud world was too weak. Even the level 8 Kingwu that was everywhere in the God realm could be counted on one hand in the drifting cloud world. They didn't even have a single martial emperor expert. Therefore, this realm was a necessary condition for them to enter the martial emperor realm. If he could not achieve this, then Xiao Yang would definitely not be qualified to form an alliance with them. Forming an alliance was a matter of mutual benefit. When you could not help others, they were not your father. Why should they help you? However, along the way, Xiao Yang did not sense any clear changes. Immediately, a trace of doubt arose in his heart. As for how some people would use the authority of the Emperor God in this test, this was not something that Xiao Yang could be concerned about. He even felt that he might not be able to protect himself in this test. Xiao Yang was valued by others, so it was necessary for him to show his worth. Therefore, he had to use this matter to prove himself once again, to make those people shut up and stop making things difficult for him regarding the alliance. Only by being tyrannical could others shut their mouths. It could be said that this was an eternal principle. Xiao Yang's heartstrings tightened as he watched the starry sky pass by him continuously. However, he still could not see anything out of the ordinary. He didn't think that this was just a pretentious threat. After a short while, Xiao Yang stopped moving forward. The flying ship was suspended in the void. In front of him, a man in black stood there. Coincidentally, he blocked the path of the flying ship. Xiao Yang naturally would not change the route so easily. This was because he was very clear that since this person was waiting here, he was probably sent by some people in the realm of the gods to stop him, although he was too far away to check the other party's realm in detail. However, looking at the straight back and the aura that flowed out naturally, one could tell that this person was not an ordinary person. Previously, Xiao Yang already had the battle record of killing Han Fenglu. This opponent was probably much stronger than Han Fenglu. Conservatively speaking, this person was at least a peak 9th level cultivator. This was because this was the style of the realm of the gods. This person would definitely not bluff. There were not many peak 9th level cultivators in the realm of the gods, but there were still quite a few of them. Looking at that person's hair, which was still black in color, and his aura was extraordinary. This person probably wasn't a peak 9th level cultivator who used endless time to slowly accumulate his strength. Xiao Yang also restrained his thoughts. This was because he clearly knew that the upcoming battle would be a tough one. Therefore, he also needed to be extra careful to prevent any accidents from happening. In the great hall of the realm of the gods, King Da said everything that he wanted to say in his heart and then laughed loudly. All these years, Big Brother God Emperor had always been planning to promote the realm of the gods. Therefore, he had almost delegated all the authority to them. However, he didn't expect that these people would feel that taking back some now would be infringing on their interests. It was such a laughable thing, but he still had to keep his mouth shut in consideration of their feelings. However, in his heart he was extremely unhappy. Until now, he had even set up a trap in the dark to harm Xiaoyang. He really couldn't tolerate this point. Therefore, he poured out all the unhappiness in his heart. Jiang Zhangqing, who was at the side, was sweating profusely. This King Da really dared to speak. When the old man heard those words, his anger rose higher and higher. From his point of view, all the changes had started after Xiaoyang had become the champion. To put it bluntly, he was the main culprit. He didn't expect King Da, who had always been known for his gentleness, to be so rude now. The God Emperor didn't say a word because he knew his second brother very well. Since he had already said everything that he wanted to say, there was no need for him to waste any more saliva. In the God Emperor's opinion, he could still take the details into consideration. However, something as important as promoting the realm of the gods to the realm of the gods still had to be decided by him. He had the authority to do so. Moreover, he felt that as long as Xiaoyang could advance to the martial emperor realm, he would definitely be of great help to him. Young people had endless possibilities. Moreover, the God Emperor also believed that as long as it was a suitable trap, he would be able to break it. Therefore, he wasn't that worried. Instead, he looked as if he was watching a show. However, the God Emperor's gaze changed very quickly. The reason for that was because he had already sensed that something was amiss the moment he saw that silhouette. Even though he couldn't see the person's face, it wasn't difficult to guess who was blocking the way based on the aura. Instantly, the God Emperor was furious. He slammed his hand on the table and shouted angrily, "Old thing, aren't you being too uptight? Xiaoyang has only just broken through to the greater 9th level. How can you be so ruthless?" The God Emperor was furious because he felt that this method was too ruthless. Chapter 1854. Hearing that shout, the old man had a look of disapproval and even sneered. He did not expect the God Emperor, who had good self-control, to be so irritable in such a situation. De Wang suddenly sensed that something was wrong. His gaze fell on the mirror. When he saw the back of the figure, his brows furrowed. He looked at the old man and clenched his fists subconsciously. This guy is crazy. He's going overboard. However, things had already come to this, and the old man was so crazy that it was too late to stop him. He could have broken through to the peak of rank 9, but he suppressed it. Moreover, didn't you say that this person's talent is on par with Princess Mingju's? He might even be on par with her in the future. Today, I'll see if he's qualified to be on par with Princess Mingju. The old man seemed to have become more carefree as he spoke. He laughed and sat down. The old man was laughing happily. He felt very comfortable when he saw their angry and helpless expressions. What a joke! Even Princess Mingju wouldn't dare to say that she'll definitely win against him. The king took a deep breath and said angrily, "At least, Princess Mingju had never fought with him before. Naturally, it was difficult to tell who was stronger between them. However, they knew very well that although Princess Mingju was in the same realm as him, the chances of her winning were too slim." The old man was still smiling. "Since I've said it, I'll naturally have to try. If this current leader can win, then in the future, I will naturally not say anything, and I will even support him. That's all fine with me. If he's beaten to death, he'll be responsible for his own life." After saying that, the old man looked at the round mirror playfully. He wanted to see how this young man would deal with all of this. At least, in the old man's eyes, it was a dead end. With Xiaoyang's ability, it was impossible for him to break out of the situation. There were no twists and turns or calculations in this situation. It was just a simple person. However, this person alone was enough to suppress the situation and prevent him from turning the tables. He might even lose his life. The corners of Jiang Zhangqing's mouth couldn't help but twitch as he said in a low voice, "Master, isn't this a little too much?" The old man glared at Jiang Zhangqing. Immediately, the current prime minister lowered his head, subconsciously, like a child who had done something wrong. He appeared to be very aggrieved. The God Emperor was almost unable to control his emotions because he felt that what he had done was truly unkind. If it was just a random peak stage 9, he wouldn't think much of it. However, this person was completely different. However, the Celestial Emperor didn't dare act rashly. He knew that if he interfered now, it would be considered as him admitting defeat. He glanced at Xiaoyang and frowned slightly. He felt that he could only choose to believe in this ally of his. It could be said that this was Xiaoyang's battle to prove himself. Although they had no chance of winning once they retreated, it would be hard to say what would happen in the future. Once they won, they would naturally be able to suppress all opposing voices. Sometimes a person could change a small world. As for the God realm, it was because of him that the God Emperor had the capital to plan to become a medium world. Shortly after, the God Emperor took out the Pisces token again. He was prepared to send another message to Xiaoyang. When the old man saw this, he sneered in disdain. What was the point of sending a message now? Even if Xiaoyang was lucky enough to escape, would he still have the face to mention the alliance in the future? Therefore, no matter what choice he made, he was confident in his victory. When he thought about how he actually had the chance to defeat the God Emperor today, he felt very comfortable. When the king saw this, his frown deepened. He didn't know how to deal with this matter. Jiang Zhangqing was also very helpless. He didn't think that things would be so extreme. If it was just dealing with an ordinary genius, it would naturally be fine. If they killed him, then so be it. There were plenty of them in the God realm. However, to be able to defeat Shen Luo and break the stalemate in the Tomb of the Gods, such a great talent was rare. Even in the God realm, such an existence was still as rare as phoenix feathers and qilin horns. If he fell, just like this, it would be too much of a pity. Even if he didn't join the God realm, it wouldn't be bad to rope him in when he had great achievements in the future. Xiaoyang looked at the black-robed man. The pressure in his heart was very great. He knew that the enemy he was facing was very strong. It was far beyond what he could bear. Fight or flee? Xiaoyang was also thinking about this question in his heart. However, he couldn't come up with an answer at the moment. It was very uncomfortable. The black-robed man slowly turned around. His expression was serious. Soon after, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. A sense of ridicule arose spontaneously. This person exuded a resolute aura. At the same time, it was mixed with a trace of killing intent. It wasn't targeted at anyone. It was something that he possessed. Obviously, it was also something that had been nurtured from killing too many people. Such a feeling was very terrible. "You are Xiaoyang?" The man slowly opened his mouth and asked. Xiaoyang nodded and said with a smile, "I am. May I know why you are blocking my way, senior?" After hearing this, the man also laughed out loud. Of course, anyone with a discerning eye could see this. It was just blocking the way to kill someone. What was there to be afraid of? Of course, such pleasantries were just empty words. Xiaoyang was just trying to find a way out for himself. He looked at this outsider who came from an unknown place but was valued by unrivaled God. Later on, he even won first place in the grand tournament. Until now, he had actually broken through to rank 9 upper tier. This was truly somewhat inconceivable. The black-robed man was very displeased with this champion in front of him. You are an outsider who stole the God realm's limelight. If you don't know your place, you won't live long. Xiaoyang was also carefully sensing the changes in the man's expression in front of him. At the same time, he was also very careful. He didn't know what the God Emperor's stance on this matter was. Therefore, he couldn't help but feel a little troubled at the moment. How to choose was an extremely difficult problem to begin with. The black-robed man snorted coldly and said, "I am Wei Beixin, on the old Prime Minister's orders. I have been waiting here to take your life." After saying this, his battle intent was unparalleled and his killing intent was revealed. Chapter 1855. When he heard the name Wei Beixin, Xiao Yang's heart instantly became extremely heavy. Of course, those words also let him know some news. That old Prime Minister wanted him dead. As for who Wei Beixin was, naturally he had heard of him. Although Xiao Yang rarely moved around in the realm of the gods, he still had a rough understanding of it from the joking conversations he had with his friends. For example, this Wei Beixin in front of him was an extraordinary existence. In the realm of the gods, there was a saying that there were 3 kings for generals and 1 prime minister. It meant that these 8 people controlled everything in the realm of the gods, and the 8 of them were the leaders. Although the 4 divine generals had the lowest status and were also the weakest among the 8 people, they were still existences that could not be underestimated. In the realm of the gods, it was already very difficult to have a name that belonged to oneself. If one did not have outstanding strength and achievements, how could one obtain such a good reputation? The 4 great divine generals guarded the 4 directions. If anyone dared to covet the realm of the gods, they would naturally take action. If the matter was blown out of proportion, they did not even need to report to lead troops to suppress. Their authority was not small. To obtain such great authority, one naturally needed to have the corresponding strength to do so. The 4 divine generals were the most tyrannical existences among the peak of the 9th stage. If it was said that Xiao Yang had defeated Xinluo in the grand competition and was at the top of the peak of the 8th stage, then the 4 divine generals had used hundreds of years to fight to the peak that belonged to them. The 4 of them were at the peak of the 9th stage. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were the peak of the entire realm of King Wu. Faced with such powerful opponents, Xiao Yang felt somewhat helpless in his heart. How could the peak of the 9th stage be so easily shaken? Moreover, the 4 of them had earned their fame from their military exploits through constant slaughter. Compared to Xinluo, who was ranked first on the Hidden Dragon leaderboard, they were many levels higher. Moreover, Xiao Yang had advanced by leaps and bounds to the 9th stage upper stage, but there was not much time left. Although he could already control it exquisitely, there were still some imperfections in it. Now that Xiao Yang recalled that he had not directly broken through to the peak of the 9th stage, it seemed that he was still too stable. If he was at the peak of the 9th step, then there was no need to worry. Even if their chances of victory were not high, they still had the strength to protect themselves. Xiao Yang took a deep breath and suppressed his emotions. Now that things had come to a head, he naturally wouldn't hesitate. However, he was waiting for news from the God Emperor. Since the God Emperor had asked him to retract his sacred art, it naturally meant that he was watching. Therefore, when faced with an unexpected situation, he would naturally have his own opinions. When Wei Beixin saw Xiao Yang's conflicted expression, he couldn't help but look forward to it. What kind of struggle would this brat make? It was said that even the Duke of Qin was looking forward to this person's growth and wanted to battle him. He also hoped that someone with such a great reputation would be able to play with him. The people who saw what happened here all had different emotions. Even though Jiang Zhangqing was unhappy, he didn't dare to go against his master's wishes. However, he truly felt that it was too much to do so. King De was even more agitated. He even rolled up his sleeves and looked as if he couldn't wait to press the old prime minister to the ground and give him a good beating. The current king could be said to be fuming with anger. If there were people in the realm of the gods who could step into the martial emperor realm at any time, it would undoubtedly be the 4 divine generals. It could be said that the 4 of them were already half a step into that realm. They just lacked an opportunity. As long as the opportunity came, they would be able to completely step into the martial emperor realm. The God Emperor didn't have much of a fluctuation in his emotions because he was now looking forward to the choice his ally would make. Although he had already made his choice, the right to make the decision was still in Xiao Yang's hands. Now, the God Emperor had also started to think about the trap that Han Fenglu had set up. Xiao Yang was able to discover something wrong from the minute details, but that was naturally not enough. Therefore, the most important thing was to have enough power to break out of the trap. In the battle with Han Fenglu, Xiao Yang had made use of the miraculous effects of the pill and Bai Jian's sword to succeed. Without these, would Xiao Yang have been able to win? Or rather, would he have been able to defeat Han Fenglu if he hadn't suffered any damage? Many people felt that it was unbelievable, but they had neglected the fact that Xiao Yang had been King Wu's level 8 cultivation at that time. Although he had made use of the power of the pill to forcefully raise his power to level 9. He wasn't really at level 9. Han Fenglu wasn't an idiot. As he thought about these details, the corners of the Divine Emperor's lips curled into a smile. He felt that today's situation would allow him to understand more about this young man. As the saying goes, seeing is believing. Today, he would be able to take a look. If Xiao Yang had chosen to turn and leave, the God Emperor wouldn't have been too disappointed. From the beginning, it had been a battle without any suspense. I'm being merciful. Wei Beixin is the weakest of the 4 divine generals. If it had been anyone else, they probably wouldn't have been able to move at all, the old man said with a smile. He had also chosen to ignore King De's anger. After all, now wasn't the time to fight over personal feelings. Since the situation had already taken shape, they only needed to watch from the sidelines. Now that they were watching the performance, they would know who was in the right and who was in the wrong. There was no point in continuing to argue with each other about it now. The king coldly snorted and stood up. I'm also the weakest among the 3 kings. Old Prime Minister, do you want to spar with me? The old man suddenly frowned. Although he was also at that level, he was still old. Although he couldn't be compared to King De, it was still difficult for him to fight. I feel that Xiao Yang has just broken through to level 9. It's not a bad idea to use Wei Beixin as a whetstone. The God Emperor suddenly sneered. As soon as he said this, King De was also stunned. In the mirror, Xiao Yang took out the Pisces token. If you fight, fight to the death. If you don't, retreat quickly and end your own life. This was the choice that the God Emperor had given Xiao Yang. Once the battle started, it would be a fight to the death. If he didn't fight, he had to retreat quickly. The choice was Xiao Yang's. Chapter 1856. Xiao Yang, on the other hand, smiled indifferently. Naturally, he understood the meaning behind this. Since the Emperor God had given him the right to choose, it was up to him to make the decision. Whether he would fight or not would depend on how he wanted to handle this matter. No matter how he handled it, the Emperor God would not be disappointed. The reason behind this was very simple. This was not a battle on the same level. Furthermore, there was no fairness to speak of. Naturally, one could escape from such a premeditated battle. Of course, being able to escape from Wei Beixin's hands was also considered a skill. As someone at the peak of King Wu's realm, his battle experience was extremely rich. Naturally, his strength was not to be doubted. However, Xiao Yang did not choose to retreat. This was because he had the same thoughts as the Emperor God. As someone at the peak of King Wu's realm, Wei Beixin's strength was extremely tyrannical. However, being able to use this person as a whetstone on his cultivation path was naturally an excellent choice. It just so happened that he had stepped into the beginning of the 9th level in one step. He was still a little doubtful about whether his strength was solid enough. However, in this way, using Wei Beixin as a whetstone would naturally allow him to know exactly how strong he was. As for losing the battle, that was something that Xiao Yang had already considered. If it really did not work out, he could still leave unscathed by sending Xiao Hua out. Although Xiao Hua had burned Sumu Hua from the Greenly realm to death, he had a great advantage in terms of attribute suppression. However, even if he was facing someone at the peak of the 9th level, it was still enough to make the other party fearful. Since there was already a way out and the whetstone had been delivered to him, Xiao Yang naturally would not be courteous. Therefore, his decision was to fight. Suddenly a thunderous aura surged. As the cold light flashed, the silver lightning spear appeared in his hand. It was sizzling. Then, let's see if Sir Divine General can take my life. As Xiaoyang spoke, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He seemed to be a little frivolous. Faced with such an opponent, the pressure on one's state of mind was naturally great. However, Xiaoyang suppressed it and faced his opponent with a relaxed attitude. Therefore, he was still fearless. Sometimes, when one was under too much pressure, it was easy to perform poorly. Therefore, relaxing one's state of mind was also an extremely important thing. One could not be careless. Wei Beixin looked at the high-spirited chief and couldn't help but feel a little disdainful. At such a young age, he only had some achievements, yet he was so arrogant. He really did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. However, it was also true. Since ancient times, which one of the people who were able to obtain the title of the champion of the god realm weren't famous existences for all eternity. As for this outsider, it was a great honor for him to be able to obtain the top spot. Therefore, it was normal for him to get carried away because of this. However, Wei Beixin secretly clenched his fists and snorted coldly. Since you've already floated to the sky, then I'll forcefully push you back into the quagmire and let you understand what it means to have a sky beyond a sky. An insignificant outsider actually dared to act so pretentious? I heard that you have a medicinal pill that can raise one's cultivation base. Let me give you a piece of advice. Quickly take it out and consume it. Otherwise, you won't be convinced even if you lose, Wei Beixin said coldly. At this moment, the spiritual energy in Wei Beixin's body surged wildly. A cold glint was reflected in his eyes, and his murderous intent was dense. Xiaoyang waved his hand indifferently and said, "This medicinal pill isn't of much help to my current cultivation base." Wei Beixin sneered. It seemed that this medicinal pill wasn't as miraculous as the rumors said. It seemed that it was just an exaggeration. If it was really useful, why wouldn't he take it out and use it? Thinking of this, Wei Beixin's heart became more and more certain. The kid in front of him did have some strength, but he wasn't as powerful as the rumors said. As for what happened in the tomb of the god of sin, it was naturally impossible that he was the one who broke the situation. Therefore, it was very likely that the imperial family had given Princess Mingzhu's credit to him to strengthen his reputation. If he killed Xiaoyang, it would definitely incur the God Emperor's displeasure. However, Wei Beixin couldn't care less. Even if the sky fell, the old prime minister would hold it up. As for himself, he would only receive some insignificant punishment. However, it could stop the unknown and unrated world from forming an alliance with the realm of the gods. That was enough. At this moment, Xiaoyang's brows were slightly furrowed, and his breathing began to change in a controlled manner. In the face of such a strong opponent, how could he deal with it calmly? The gap in strength was difficult to overcome. Although he had fought to a draw with Lei Dingtian and killed Han Fenglu when he was at the 8th level, he was still in the 8th level. However, that was subject to many circumstances. Although he was only a small realm away from Wei Beixin, it was still a difference of 1,000 miles. Xiaoyang didn't take the initiative to attack. Instead, he waited quietly. Sometimes, if you took the initiative to attack, you might be in a situation where you were full of flaws. In the face of such a strong opponent who had experienced hundreds of battles, any small mistake could put you in danger. Therefore, he didn't dare to act blindly without thinking. He could only wait. When the king and Jiang Zhongqing saw that Xiaoyang hadn't left and had even taken out his weapon, it was obvious that he was prepared to fight, and they were instantly shocked. Could it be that this guy had lost his mind? Or could it be that his confidence had swelled after his consecutive victories, and he couldn't tell the difference between them? The king looked at the God Emperor worriedly. They didn't know what the God Emperor had said in his message. However, Xiaoyang's current decision definitely had something to do with the God Emperor. The God Emperor had a faint smile on his face, and his eyes were filled with admiration. It was similar to what he had expected. If he didn't fight with all his strength, How could he be happy when facing such a good whetstone? Some geniuses might not have been born with an advantage, but they would rely on countless opportunities to fight for it. It was like seeking riches and honor amidst danger. However, this was walking on the tip of a blade. If they were the slightest bit careless and fell, they would probably be torn apart by the countless blades. The old man looked at the God Emperor and frowned slightly. He was also somewhat puzzled. A good whetstone needs to have a good blade. If the blade isn't good, it will probably be ground to pieces. The old man sneered and said in a strange tone, Chapter 1857. Faced with such mockery, the Emperor God remained playful and did not get angry. To the two of them, this was a huge gamble. It was just a matter of who would win. As for the God Emperor, he naturally trusted the people he thought highly of. From his point of view, even if Xiaoyang was no match for him, it was still normal. There was no need to make a fuss about it. However, the fact that he had chosen to face the challenge head-on and not run away from the problem was enough to prove that such an ally was reliable. It could even be said that the Emperor God believed that Xiaoyang would definitely lose this battle. However, as long as he could escape, the benefits of this battle would be very high. Wei Beixin's strength was recognized by the entire God realm. There were naturally countless benefits to fighting with him. Of course, the prerequisite was that Wei Beixin had to be able to escape alive. Otherwise, there was no point in saying anything else. King De was also very uneasy. It was not that he did not believe in Xiaoyang's strength, but the situation was too serious. Furthermore, Wei Beixin was also known for being ruthless. If he had the chance, he would definitely kill Xiaoyang directly. Wei Beixin cherished talents. He had this kind of heart for the people of the God realm. He was cold and heartless to the people of the God realm. It was also because of this that the old Prime Minister had chosen Wei Beixin to do this. If it were the other three, they might have recognized Xiaoyang or even let him go. Jiang Zhongqing smiled bitterly. Although he was the Prime Minister of the God realm and had a lot of authority, he was still in front of the old Prime Minister. However, in front of the Prime Minister, he was still like a child, not daring to say a word. It could even be said that the old Prime Minister was a huge mountain in Jiang Zhongqing's heart. He did not dare to have the slightest opinion. Even though he was very clear about many things, he did not dare to say anything. He could only keep it in his heart and not say anything. Since the Emperor God said that this kid is extraordinary, let me see what's different about him, the old Prime Minister said with a cold smile. King De snorted and was very displeased. This was a complete death trap, and this old man still dared to shamelessly say that it was a test. He was really shameless. However, the King was still brooding over why Xiaoyang had chosen to fight. He looked at the divine emperor in confusion, hoping that his big brother could give him an explanation. The god emperor, on the other hand, acted as if it was none of his business and that he was the one who made the decision. The situation was in a stalemate. Xiaoyang didn't take the initiative to make a move, but he was prepared. For example, the true intent myriad forms art. With a single breath of intent, it became his strongest defense. However, the other party had yet to make a move. This caused Xiaoyang's nerves to be extremely tense, and he felt extremely uncomfortable. However, he didn't dare to act rashly to avoid making a mistake. Of course, Xiaoyang's combat experience was also very rich, but he knew even more clearly that sometimes, no matter how perfect one's attack was, it could still be broken by force in front of a stronger opponent. Therefore, he chose to defend and then look for an opportunity to counterattack. Wei Beixin saw that Xiaoyang was just standing there with his aura circulating, but he didn't have any intention of making a move. Could it be that you're really made of paper? You look like you're filled with battle intent, but you don't even have the courage to make a move? You're really a little ridiculous. Could it be that you're someone who bullies the weak and fears the strong? You know that you're not my match, so you can only put on airs? Wei Beixin said disdainfully. Xiaoyang smiled bitterly when he heard this. Of course, he couldn't possibly fly into a rage because of this. After all, sometimes Anger would only cause one to lose their rationality. Therefore, such words were unable to infuriate him at all, let alone cause him to lose his composure. On the contrary, his state of mind became much calmer because of this. At the same time, Xiaoyang began to plot. However, he didn't know much about Wei Beixin. Therefore, no matter how he looked at it, it wouldn't be an easy task to plot against him. You're still indifferent even after being insulted like that. This isn't as high-spirited as you were before. I really don't know how that brat unrivaled combat god saw in you that he was willing to give up his spot to you. Even if you become the champion, you're still just a piece of trash who doesn't dare to make a move, Wei Beixin said with a cold smile. Xiaoyang still didn't make a move. It was as if he didn't care about these taunts. As far as he was concerned, all he had to do now was to protect his own heart. If he was affected, it would be very bad. The atmosphere had become very strange because of this. Although everyone was filled with battle intent, no one made the first move. Everything seemed very subtle now. A great battle was about to break out, but it was still very quiet. How boring. Since you don't dare to make a move, let me do it, Wei Beixin said coldly. As soon as he finished speaking, Wei Beixin moved. He charged straight at Xiaoyang. Instantly, Xiaoyang's heart was greatly shocked. He did not expect that this person's speed would be so fast. He was so fast that he was like a flash of light. In the blink of an eye, he was right in front of Xiaoyang. He threw a punch without any fancy moves. There was no hesitation at all. The strength of the punch was as terrifying as the explosion of a superior-grade, heaven-level magic weapon. For a moment, Xiaoyang was shocked. Even if he wanted to retreat now, it was too late. This was because everything had happened too quickly. Even if one's perception was very strong, it would still take time to react accordingly. It wasn't that he wasn't strong enough. It was just that everything happened too quickly and he was caught off guard. However, Xiaoyang was also someone who had experienced hundreds of battles. Under such circumstances, he didn't panic at all. At the same time, he pointed the silver spear in his hand at his opponent's chest. Since it was too late to defend, he would use the method of exchanging injury for injury to fight. As for the result, it didn't matter anymore. Injuries were unavoidable, but the opponent had to pay a corresponding price. Otherwise, he would have suffered these injuries for nothing. Therefore, this battle was just as the Emperor God had said. It was a battle to the death. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any hope. On the contrary, there might be some unexpected surprises in a battle to the death. The silver spear glowed coldly. At this moment, the lightning covering it surged like a long snake, ready to strike. Chapter 1858. Wei Beixin sneered in disdain when the spear pierced towards him. He had naturally seen many people who would trade their lives for his. However, he had never thought that the current chief would be such a person. It seemed that his previous ridicule had failed because Wei Beixin was not a person who was afraid of death. Naturally, he would not take it to heart. Therefore, this was not strange at all. However, this spear definitely could not be taken head-on. If he did, his chest would probably explode. Therefore, Wei Beixin's fist immediately fell and smashed onto the spearhead. Instantly, under the pull of a huge force, Xiaoyang actually lost his grip on the spear. Instantly, the spearhead rapidly fell. At the same time, Wei Beixin attacked again and swept over. This set of movements could be said to be smooth and without the slightest hesitation or pause. It could be said to be very relaxed and natural. Xiaoyang did not dare to be careless, and immediately threw out a punch. It could be said that he did not give in at all. There wasn't much time for hesitation in a fight between experts. It could be said that in such a situation, their greatest reliance was the combat skills that they had honed over countless years. In the most critical moment, they did not need to think. They only needed to use their instincts to resist. That was enough. Sometimes victory and defeat could be decided in the blink of an eye. That was a very normal thing. Boom! Suddenly, with a loud bang, the power exploded. Xiaoyang was obviously not a match for it and was immediately sent flying backwards. Wei Beixin, on the other hand, remained unmoved. In the face of such a powerful force, he allowed the airwaves to continuously attack his body. However, he did not feel it at all and did not leave any traces. In the next moment, Wei Beixin immediately continued to charge forward. Since the opportunity had come, he naturally had to follow up with the attack. Since it was a battle that could be resolved quickly, there was naturally no need to delay and delay. Wei Beixin had always been like this. Even when facing opponents who were weaker than him, he would still be fully focused on the battle. As long as there was an opportunity to kill the opponent, he would naturally not miss it. Therefore, Wei Beixin had been able to end the battle very quickly in the past few hundred years. He did not give his opponent any chance and would not make the slightest mistake. In an instant, a huge pressure came to Xiaoyang. When he felt the opponent's attack, he immediately made a decision in his heart. 7 steps of the barbarian god. Instantly, Xiaoyang took a step in the air and straightened his body. The silver spear that was originally dragging in his hand was also straightened immediately. Bolts of lightning once again surged and enveloped his entire body within. With a loud shout, the bolts of lightning shot towards Wei Beixin like giant pythons. When Wei Beixin saw those bolts of lightning, he still looked disdainful. Look, in his opinion, if it was Lei Dingtian, he would still have some scruples. How could a mere Xiaoyang be worth mentioning? Therefore, Wei Beixin still did not hesitate to throw a punch at those bolts of lightning. Obviously, he wanted to use his fists to shatter all the bolts of lightning. Under the punch, a bolt of lightning did not have the slightest resistance. It was directly bombarded into pieces and fell like snowflakes. However, the other bolts of lightning also arrived in the blink of an eye. Wei Beixin did not even look at them and quickly threw a few punches in the void. Suddenly, a majestic fist, intent, surged out. Those bolts of lightning also shattered inch by inch and lost their previous power. However, in this short moment of obstruction, Xiaoyang had already stabilized his body. At the same time, he held the silver spear in a very strange way and once again poured out his battle intent. His aura also rose rapidly at this moment. When he felt that his opponent's aura had suddenly become stronger at this moment, Wei Beixin still did not care and continued to charge forward. Even if you've taken this opportunity to adjust yourself and are ready for battle, so what? The huge gap in strength wasn't something that could be easily closed. Thunder movement! Xiaoyang shouted in a low voice. In the next moment, he turned into a bolt of lightning and directly charged towards Wei Beixin. Although this move was a sword technique, the silver lightning spear's lightning was purer than the divine swords. Therefore, its power was displayed incisively and vividly. At this moment, Wei Beixin was also a little surprised. Who would have thought that this guy would suddenly have such a powerful explosive force? He had to admit that the current chief was still somewhat capable. However, Wei Beixin did not hesitate or observe because of this. He continued to charge forward. Obviously, he wanted to use this opportunity to take down Xiaoyang. At this moment, the two of them were very ambitious. They both wanted to suppress each other in this aspect. However, neither of them wanted to admit defeat, so there was a tit-for-tat situation. Under this huge pressure, Xiaoyang was not restrained at all. Instead, he looked like a fish in water and continued to charge forward. In a flash, the two of them collided. For a moment, the sound of explosions could be said to be one after another. It was ear-splitting. After the two of them collided, they charged in another direction. However, along the way, they constantly attacked each other. With every punch, there would definitely be a thunderous spear in return. Thunder movement was so terrifying. While its speed was extremely fast, it was also constantly erupting. It was difficult to match or block. Wherever the two of them passed, there was a cloud of smoke. Fortunately, there were no other small worlds in the place they were in. Otherwise, they would have inexplicably suffered an unexpected disaster. For a moment, Wei Beixin was also very surprised. He did not expect Xiao Yang's strength to be stronger than he had imagined. At the very least, the power that was erupting was almost the same as that of a cultivator at the peak of the 9th level. Of course, that was only in comparison to the number 3 in the 3, 6, and 9. However, he was a 9. At this point, Wei Beixin finally understood why this person was valued so highly. As someone from a small world that was not in the mainstream, being able to cultivate to such a level was enough to prove his strength. It was a pity that he loved to be in the limelight and did things that he should not have done. Therefore, this was the cause of his death. Even though he saw the other party's talent, he still would not feel pity and would still kill him. Chapter 1859. This was also one of the reasons why the old prime minister of the god realm valued Wei Beixin. Naturally, he would do his best to protect his own genius. However, he would not show any mercy to outsiders. Whenever he attacked, he would definitely kill without showing any mercy. It could be said that he was incomparably decisive. At this moment, the pressure that Xiaoyang was facing was also extremely great. Fortunately, his foundation was solid enough. In addition, he had a strong will to support himself. Therefore, the current situation was as if they were evenly matched. However, Xiaoyang was still not feeling good. This was because, in the face of such a powerful attack, it was inevitable that he would make some mistakes. It was simply impossible for him to resist all of them. Fortunately, the damage was not very serious. After half a cup of tea's time, the power of the two could no longer be suppressed and exploded. Immediately, both parties were shaken to the point where they could not control themselves. Furthermore, they were also sent flying backwards at an extremely fast speed. It was obvious that they were in a very sorry state. After retreating, Xiaoyang floated in the void. However, he was constantly panting. It was obvious that he was in great pain. Even the hand that was holding the spear had begun to tremble. It was obvious that he had suffered quite a bit of damage. Even the silver lightning spear had become dim at this moment. It was as if it had exhausted all of its strength and was greatly damaged. Wei Beixin stood at the side. However, he did not attack immediately. Instead, he stood there without moving at all. It was not that he did not want to take advantage of this gap to kill him. However, he was also in a state where he could not continue. Therefore, he did not attack. At this moment, Wei Beixin was extremely shocked. He did not expect his opponent to have such strength. He had really underestimated him previously. If it was an ordinary person who had reached the 9th level, under such a fierce attack, even if they did not die, they would probably be seriously injured and on the verge of death. Xiaoyang was indeed seriously injured. The qi and blood in his body were surging nonstop. It was like a shocking wave that surged to the heavens. Even though there was a trace of blood in his throat, Xiaoyang forcefully swallowed it down. He knew that if he were to reveal this now, it would cause his arrogance to waver. Therefore, in a situation where one's strength was already at a disadvantage, one could not be at a disadvantage in terms of aura. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. It wasn't that he didn't want to fight back. It was just that he felt bitter in his heart. Facing such an opponent was really unbearable. At this moment, his previous plan had also turned into nothingness. In the face of such tyrannical strength, it was definitely not an easy task to rely on some small tricks to deal with and defeat it. However, Xiaoyang felt much better when he saw the charred marks on Wei Beixin's face and hands. Although Wei Beixin's injuries were not as severe as his, it gave Xiaoyang a message that he could still injure Wei Beixin. As long as he could injure him, there would be endless possibilities. Wei Beixin patted his clothes casually, as if they were stained with dust. However, the way he looked at his opponent became much more sinister at this moment. Not bad indeed. It's a pity that you're not from the realm of the gods. It's fine if you're not, but you still have the guts to think so much. As Wei Beixin spoke, the smile on his face gradually became cruel. Seeing the divine general's current state and words, Xiaoyang laughed disdainfully. This was because, in his opinion, this person was really too arrogant. Moreover, the hostility revealed in his words was obviously to eliminate a threat. Such a method was also somewhat incomprehensible. It could be said that the people of the realm of the gods were born with arrogance, which made them feel that the excellence of the outside world did not conform to common sense and should not exist. Wei Beixin had such a mentality now, so this made him even more determined to kill Xiaoyang. After sensing the other party's malice, Xiaoyang sneered and said, "You speak as if you can really kill me." The other party's attitude made Xiaoyang feel extremely disgusted. Therefore, he raised his spear and prepared to attack again. Success or failure was no longer that important. Therefore, what he needed to do was to fight with all his strength. He could not care less about the result. However, whether he could fight to his heart's content was something that Xiaoyang needed to consider carefully. Therefore, his heart became much more determined at this moment, and the aura all over his body condensed at this moment. In an instant, the silver lightning spear was once again covered by a layer of lightning. It was surging rapidly, giving people a sense of awe. Seeing that the current chief was once again in a state of readiness, Wei Beixin also straightened out the aura in his body. He sneered and clenched his fist again. How satisfying would it be to beat those geniuses to death with one punch after another? Xiaoyang was also the most powerful genius that Wei Beixin had ever faced. Therefore, he felt that he would enjoy the process very much. The pleasure that he would get at the end would probably be the most comfortable. In an instant, Wei Beixin's aura exploded once again, and the killing intent in his eyes became even more intense. Xiaoyang no longer observed his opponent. Instead, he held the silver spear with both hands and poured the power in his body into it. Even the lightning spiritual meridian in his body was surging rapidly at this moment, and it began to release all its power. This battle could not be avoided at all, so he could only give it his all. Mobilizing the power in the spiritual meridian could make one's attack more powerful. However, there were also some terrifying possibilities. Once the power in the spiritual meridian was drained, it was very likely that it would dry up. Therefore, it was very normal for one's cultivation level to drop because of this. However, Xiaoyang did not care about these problems. Instead, he frantically extracted the power of lightning from the spiritual meridian. It was all for the sake of accumulating power for a strike that could defeat his opponent. It was just a small spiritual meridian. In Xiaoyang's opinion, it was nothing if it was gone. Although it would be very difficult to cultivate it again, he did not care. If he could win this battle by luck, then he would be seen differently in the eyes of the Emperor God in the future. It would even be enough to shut many people up. Thousand Poison, Lightning, Dragon, Roar. Chapter 1860. Wei Beixin sneered in disdain when he saw that Xiaoyang had begun to frantically draw out the power in the spiritual vein. However, he could understand another reason, which was that his opponent had reached where he was today through constant fighting and killing. Therefore, in a battle where he had no chance of winning, he had to fight with all his might, even at the cost of a heavy price. However, in Wei Beixin's opinion, this was just a desperate gamble. However, such an approach did not have much effect at all. The gap in strength could not be made up for by using a crazy fighting method. The gap was the gap, and no matter how much one paid, it would be difficult to make up for it. Therefore, the outcome had long been decided, and no matter how one struggled, it could not be changed. However, on second thought, this was indeed the case. Since Xiaoyang had no reason to survive, he could only fight with all his might in this battle. So what if his cultivation realm dropped? As long as he could protect his own life, it would be an extremely difficult task. Therefore, a drop in cultivation realm was considered light. Seeing that the young man had such a tenacious will and a strong desire to live, Wei Beixin was indeed very respectable. Therefore, Wei Beixin also admired such a person. However, admiration had nothing to do with killing this person. In fact, after killing him, he would not have the slightest regret. Instead, he would be even more excited. It could be said that after so many years of killing, Wei Beixin's mentality had undergone a great change. The exhilaration of torturing and killing geniuses caused him to become a lot more deranged. Soon after, Wei Bei-shin no longer looked at him. With a low roar, majestic spiritual energy poured out like a river. Before the punch was thrown, the fist intent had already condensed and floated in the void as if it was real. Its momentum was monstrous. At this moment, the atmosphere had also become much more solemn. It was as if every single aura contained extremely dense killing intent, and no one could change it. If an ordinary person came here, they would probably be suffocated by this aura and unable to extricate themselves. This feeling was very uncomfortable, but fortunately they were in this sea of stars, so no one else would be affected. In the next moment, Xiaoyang moved. He thrust out the long spear in his hand. Immediately, the thunderbolt that had been accumulating power for a long time exploded. Immediately, it was as if a lightning dragon had gone berserk, charging out with a loud bang. The sound of thunder was like the roar of a giant dragon. Its might shook the heavens and was enough to make people tremble in fear. Because of this, they were extremely terrified. Lightning had always been something that most cultivators were afraid of. Even the cultivators of the god realm were no exception to this. Therefore, Wei Bei-shin couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air under such circumstances. After feeling the terrifying power, he immediately calmed down. This was an all-out attack from a powerhouse at the peak of the 9th stage. He had even gambled everything he had. Therefore, such an attack was not to be underestimated. He had to be prepared for it, and he could not afford to be careless. In fact, he was even a little shocked. Such power was not inferior to an all-out attack from a peak of the 9th stage. However, Wei Bei-shin was not an ordinary peak of the 9th stage. So what if he was close to the 6th stage? There was still a huge gap between him and the 9th stage. Therefore, even if he felt a little threatened, it was still difficult to shake him. Therefore, Wei Bei-shin's expression only became more serious, and at the same time he increased the strength of his hand. There was no suspense in this battle. Even though a great storm had been stirred up, the outcome was still unchangeable. Wei Bei-shin had always believed in this point. Looking at the lightning dragon that was rapidly approaching, Wei Bei-shin placed his hands in front of his chest. His eyes were constantly emitting a fierce light. Waves of majestic fist intent continued to condense at this moment. At the same time, several waves of fist intent were sent out, directly bombarding the lightning dragon. The incomparably powerful fist will blasted onto the unstoppable lightning dragon. However, the lightning dragon was not shattered, and it did not even shift. It continued to move forward, as if nothing could stop it from moving forward. Xiaoyang followed behind the lightning dragon, and the silver lightning spear in his hand was still continuously transmitting power. So what if all the power in the lightning spiritual vein was drained? As long as it could change the outcome of the battle, it was worth it. Therefore, there was no need to have too many concerns. As long as a corner of the tall building was damaged, it could be expanded continuously or even collapse directly. At this moment, Wei Bei-shin's heart had changed again. At the same time, he was also extremely shocked. The ability displayed by this kid was indeed a little too much. The lightning dragon's power was still increasing continuously. With such accumulation, how terrifying would the power of the attack be? This was really unimaginable. Therefore, Wei Bei-shin was now somewhat uncertain. However, in a battle, great changes could often occur in the blink of an eye and determine the outcome of the battle. Therefore, Wei Bei-shin did not have much time to think, so he did not think too much about it. With a roar, he threw out a punch. Instantly, half of the fist intent came crashing down like a storm. The strong fist intent was like raindrops, and it continuously smashed onto the lightning dragon. The lightning dragon roared continuously, and its power was constantly being depleted and weakened. However, it did not stop moving forward at all. This was because Xiaoyang was pushing the lightning dragon forward from behind, and he was continuously providing power. Therefore, Although the lightning dragon was greatly depleted, it could be replenished in a short period of time. Although it was not as strong as before, it was not much weaker. Before it could get close to Wei Beixin, Xiao Yang's lightning spiritual vein had already been depleted by more than half. It could be said that the current situation was not very optimistic. However, the arrow was already knocked on the bow, and it had to be released. Even if his momentum was exhausted, there was no way out, and he could only move forward bravely. This was Xiao Yang. When faced with such a desperate situation, he would do his best to create a miracle that belonged to him. Chapter 1861. Wei Beixin's expression turned grave when he sensed that the power wasn't weak at all. At this moment, he also felt that his opponent was indeed a very tyrannical existence. Moreover, this kind of life and death battle was just that terrifying. Sometimes, when a person became crazy in a dangerous situation, the power that erupted from them would be extremely strong and difficult to match. However, this only made Wei Beixin feel a little different. He didn't feel any fear or retreat because of this. The strength of the peak of rank 9 was the peak of King Wu's realm. The accumulation of power over the past few hundred years was also extremely terrifying. Therefore, when faced with such an attack, he already had a countermeasure in his heart. He immediately began to extract the power from the spiritual vein. For Wei Beixin, it had been a long time since he had a battle like this. It had to be said that this was a very carefree battle, so he was prepared to go all out. If he didn't do so, then he would reveal his weakness and be defeated by this brat in the end. That was possible. However, Wei Beixin would never allow such a situation to happen. The power extracted from the spiritual vein was the fist intent that had been contained for hundreds of years. At this moment, it was like a flood that had broken through the dam and poured out in torrents. Every fist intent had a long and mellow aura, as if it was unrivaled. Even the space around him was constantly exploding. This showed how terrifying the fist intent was. Even though he felt that his opponent's strength and aura were constantly increasing, Xiao Yang still seemed to be in a state of desperation. This was because he wanted a life-and-death battle. As for what would happen to him after this attack, it wasn't something that he could worry about now. Therefore, he only needed to move forward. In the blink of an eye, the dragon head had already arrived. Wei Beixin growled and punched out with both fists. Immediately, a pair of fists smashed into the dragon's head. Suddenly, thunderbolts kept exploding as if they wanted to bite off his opponent's fists. However, Wei Beixin's arms continued to glow with profound light. Every ray of light was extremely dazzling and sharp, as if they were unparalleled. Anyone who saw them would feel shocked. The thunderbolts kept exploding, but they were blocked by the mysterious light. They couldn't touch Wei Beixin at all. It was as if it was an unshakable mountain that stood there, insurmountable. Lei Long continued to move forward and collided with Wei Beixin's chest. However, it only pushed him back and didn't penetrate his body. In the next moment, Wei Beixin grabbed the dragon's head with both hands, as if he wanted to crush it to death. With a roar, streams of tyrannical fist will flowed through his hands and into the thunder dragon. Immediately, the two completely different forces began to clash. It was an extremely intense battle. The sound of explosions rang out incessantly, and the aftershocks were extremely terrifying. Within a radius of 1,000 miles, it could be said that the aftershocks were not small. The air also became restless because of these violent forces. Smoke filled the air, and the common people were plunged into misery and suffering. Xiao Yang was still moving forward with the Thunder Dragon. It could be said that this was the martial technique that he was proud of. However, he didn't expect that it would be blocked so easily by his opponent. This was something that no one had expected. However, Xiao Yang had great perseverance. At the same time, after he confirmed this point, it was absolutely impossible for him to give up. Therefore, he continued to charge forward. As the Thunder Dragon continued to be bombarded by the fist will, it also began to diminish rapidly. Its power also began to weaken, and it was no longer as powerful as before. Even though there were many thunderbolts like whips that lashed at Wei Beixin's body, it didn't seem to have much effect. The profound light on his body was like a soft armor that blocked all of the thunderbolts. In an instant, Xiaoyang arrived. At this moment, the silver spear in his hand once again exploded with an extremely terrifying power. This spear was aimed at Wei Beixin's heart. If it succeeded, this spear would be enough to directly burst Wei Beixin's heart and even break his spine. At that time, even if he didn't die, he would probably be seriously injured. Due to the circulation of his qi, his strength would be greatly reduced, and he would no longer be as glorious as before. At that time, it would be much easier to kill him. Since the God Emperor had already spoken, he would fight to the death. This also meant that there wouldn't be any problems if he killed Wei Beixin. Therefore, he didn't need to worry too much. He just needed to charge forward and fight with his life. Wei Beixin also moved. His hands were constantly moving, and the Thunder Dragon's speed of dissipation became even faster. When the Thunder Dragon was reduced by more than half, Wei Beixin's eyes were sharp and his hands were agile. He directly grabbed the spearhead with both hands and used the force to quickly retreat. The spearhead was still 6 inches away from his heart, but it couldn't go any further. Wei Beixin allowed the thunderbolts to explode and bombard his hands, but he didn't care about that. He naturally knew what was important and what was urgent. If he really let this kid have his way, the price he had to pay would be very high. It was even possible that he would be given an opportunity. In the next moment, Wei Beixin roared and stabilized his body. At the same time, he exerted force in his arms. Immediately, Xiaoyang started to fly along with the silver spear. He couldn't control it at all. In the blink of an eye, the situation had undergone a huge change. Xiaoyang, who had already used the thunder spiritual vein to fight to the death, was now like a kite. He was being pulled along and forced to float uncontrollably. There was naturally a reason why Wei Beixin was able to become one of the 4 great divine generals. Even though he was the weakest of the 4 great divine generals, he was still in existence, second only to the other 3 divine generals in King Wu's realm. Xiaoyang hadn't been in rank 9 for long. Even though he had heaven-defying fighting strength, he was still somewhat powerless in front of absolute strength. No matter how valiant one was, there were times when one had no choice but to accept reality. Sometimes it was so cruel that no matter how much one racked their brains, they would probably still be unable to change the situation. Of course, Xiaoyang wasn't someone who would easily admit defeat. In his mind, a countermeasure quickly flashed by. After all, following the other party's rhythm was an extremely terrifying thing. Who knew when he would be killed by the other party?